Hey guys, tonight we're going way back before heated blankets, fleece pyjamas, or the blessed miracle of central heating. You're in a medieval battle camp now, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Between the dysentery, enemy arrows, and the bone-cracking cold, bedtime is less about dreaming and more about not dying in your sleep. But don't worry, you're here to observe, not to freeze to death. Unless, of course, you forget to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Quick question before we start. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Always curious how many of you are dozing off to the sound of historical misery from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The night starts with smoke curling from a dozen low fires, barely flames at all, just stubborn, red-glowing embers feeding on damp wood and whatever scraps the soldiers can scavenge. You're standing in a ring of men who all look vaguely like they could be brothers, though they're from wildly different places. Scots, Franks, some wiry Saxons muttering to themselves. You're wrapped in what counts as a cloak, though it smells like it was used as a horse blanket just yesterday. That's because it was. The fire you're sitting around isn't exactly cheerful. It's more like a reluctant co-worker. It's there because it has to be, not because it likes you. The wood is too wet to catch properly, so everyone leans in close, soaking up what little warmth there is before someone shifts and sends up a cloud of eye-watering smoke. The men grumble, blink, and settle back in. This is the nightly ritual. Gather close, share heat, trade rumours. Someone's talking about how a nearby village had a hidden wine cellar, already raided and long gone. Another mutters about the strange noises he heard last night. Definitely wolves, or maybe worse. You're mostly quiet because every word you speak is another puff of precious heat lost to the air. You glance around, trying to figure out where you're supposed to sleep. Spoiler, it's right here. This patch of trampled dirt next to the fire is where you'll spend the night. No mattress, no cot, just you, your cloak, maybe a bit of straw if you were clever, or lucky, enough to gather some before dark. If not, it's you and the cold, baby. That fire you're huddling around, it's not just for comfort, it's survival. Medieval soldiers knew this. They'd take turns tending the embers all night, poking at the coals, feeding them tiny twigs to keep them alive without creating too much light. Why not more fire? Because fire brings eyes. Enemy scouts, lurking bandits, wild beasts, everyone sees flame. So you get this compromise. Warmth without visibility. In many camps there's a system to how people sleep around the fire. The high-ranking guys, captains, knights, might get tents, we'll get there later. But the grunts, they lie in concentric rings around the flames, feet pointed in like spokes on a wheel. The logic, feet get cold first, feet need heat, and if someone creeps into camp, the outer ring wakes up first, human alarm system. Medieval security at its smoky best, the guy next to you is already snoring, breath fogging up with every exhale. He's pulled his hood low over his eyes, curled into a shape that looks vaguely rodent-like. You can hear the quiet clink of his gear shifting as he moves in his sleep, his belt and dagger still strapped on just in case. Nobody here fully undresses to sleep. You wouldn't either, not unless you wanted to freeze or worse, wake up stabbed. The ground beneath you is damp, not wet exactly, but the kind of soaked-through cold that creeps through fabric and right into your bones. It's worse than snow. Snow at least has texture. This is just earth, dark and unfriendly. One of the older soldiers told you to dig a shallow trench for your hips, so your spine wouldn't ache so badly in the morning. You didn't. You regret it. Historical fact of the night. Campfires weren't invented by medieval soldiers, but they did perfect the social choreography of them. Fire wasn't just a heat source, it was a tactical centerpiece, a cooking zone, a storytelling arena, and a low-tech psychological comfort. That glow meant survival. But here's something on the weirder side. In some medieval campaigns, like during the Crusades, soldiers were ordered to sleep fully dressed not just for speed, but because someone believed that taking your boots off at night was inviting evil spirits to take your feet. Superstition or battlefield practicality? Honestly, bit of both. As you start to lie back, well, more like shift your weight to an uncomfortable lean, you realise you're not going to be sleeping well, but maybe sleeping at all is the goal. The fire cracks, someone coughs, a hound barks in the distance. The air smells of sweat, smoke, and something slightly sweet. Probably spoiled wine spilled on someone's coat. Scholars still debate just how cold medieval soldiers got. Some argue they were better acclimated to it, more resistant due to years of exposure. Others say no, freezing to death in the night was a real risk, especially during winter campaigns. Diaries, where they exist, mention comrades who simply did not rise in the morning, frozen or weakened beyond saving. There's no consensus, just cold anecdotes. But tonight, you're still breathing. You shift a little closer to the guy next to you. He grunts, doesn't complain. You both know the rule, no such thing as personal space when it's below freezing. The fire crackles again, and you feel a tiny patch of warmth creep across your boots. Maybe tonight won't be so bad. Maybe. You learn pretty quickly that nobody sleeps in armour unless they're either about to be ambushed or deeply lacking in brain cells. Hollywood might love the image of knights slumping back against tree trunks in full plate, but here in the actual mud-soaked reality of a medieval battle camp, that would be a guaranteed way to wake up paralysed from the neck down, or not wake up at all. Armour doesn't just restrict movement, it locks heat out, traps cold sweat inside, and turns your body into a chilled tin can. So what do you sleep in? Wool, and a lot of it. Before bed, you shrug off the day's armour piece by piece. First, the mail coif comes off, heavy and damp around the edges, your scalp slicked with sweat. Then the hauberk, a knee-length chainmail shirt, probably the heaviest piece of gear you own. It clinks and sighs as you peel it off, the cold night air rushing against the tunic underneath. A few of the other men groan as they go through the same ritual, joints popping, muscles twitching like coiled springs suddenly let go. You're down now to your padded gambeson, the thick quilted jacket that acts as both underarmour and, as you're discovering, makeshift pyjamas. It's stained and smells like the week you've just endured, iron from blood, sour sweat, ash and damp wool. But it's warm and that's all that matters. A few of the more seasoned soldiers start layering up with every spare cloth they can find. Linen undershirts, woolen hose, even old sacks tied around the feet. You watch one guy wrap rags around his legs like makeshift leg warmers. He's not laughing. No one is. Everyone knows how precious even a little bit of insulation can be. Some men carry small bedrolls, basically a cloak or rough wool blanket they can wrap themselves in like a sad burrito. A few lucky ones have cloaks lined with fur, some scavenged or bought with coin. You do not. Your cloak is thick but threadbare, and it has a hole near the collar that lets in cold air like a dagger. You consider stuffing it with straw later. For now, it's your outermost layer, and you pull it tighter as the breeze cuts through camp like a thief looking for toes. Wool, you discover, is a medieval miracle. It insulates even when wet, something that linen and cotton just don't do. That's why nearly every soldier, rich or poor, is bundled up in it at night. Tunics, cloaks, hose, mittens. If it's wool, it's welcome. You're layered like an onion that's seen too much war. The chill still seeps in, slowly, deliberately, but the layers delay its victory. You lie down, wrapped tight, and try not to think about the way the ground is claiming the heat from your back like it owns it. The downside to all these layers. Moving in your sleep is a joke. You roll over and get caught in your own cloak. Someone next to you grumbles as you jostle him, and you both spend a moment adjusting slowly in the dark, like two snails re-wrapping their shells. No one wants to speak. You only open your mouth to let out a slow breath, and maybe mutter something under it, some curse or prayer or both. Historically speaking, the sleeping gear of a medieval foot soldier was not uniform. Some soldiers slept in just their undertunics, while others piled on every scrap of fabric they could find. Inventories from campaigns often list blankets of wool, sheets of linen, and the occasional furred cloak, especially among higher ranks. But for most common soldiers, it was whatever they could carry or steal. Trade routes sometimes brought in felted or woven materials from distant markets, and if you were lucky, you might snag a blanket from a merchant caravan or a raided village. And here's a fun fringe detail you didn't ask for but now can't unknow. Some soldiers stuffed their boots or gloves with sheep dung before sleep. Not for insulation, though maybe a bit, but because dried dung, when burned or smouldered, gave off a kind of slow, smokeless heat. A miserable, smelly hack. But when your fingers are going numb, pride is optional. Meanwhile, some historians still argue whether medieval armies had anything approaching a standardised sleep setup. There's evidence of military quartermasters providing sleeping sacks to elite troops in some European armies by the late 14th century, essentially early sleeping bags made of heavy cloth or fur, but there's just as much evidence suggesting that most men simply made do with whatever rags and hides they could pile under their cloaks. There's no conclusive answer. It's a historical shrug under a mountain of scratchy fabric. As you curl in tighter, you start to lose track of time. You can't see the moon, it's behind clouds or cloak, but you can hear the slow shifting of the camp. One man coughs, another sees and snores in a rhythmic wheeze. Somewhere, someone is whispering what sounds like a prayer. You can't tell if it's for warmth, safety, or forgiveness. Probably all three. You keep your knife close, not because you expect to use it, but because it gives you something to hold on to. The cold is no longer sharp, it's become dull and relentless, pressing in from all sides like water against a cracked boat. You feel it in your fingertips, your toes, the bridge of your nose, but your core is warm enough and your layers are doing their job just barely. You let your eyes close and your body sag into the damp earth. It's not comfortable, but it's something like rest. You don't dream, you're too alert for that, but your thoughts blur, stretching into the darkness beyond the fire's glow. There's a trick to sleeping on dirt without feeling like your spine is being individually assassinated by every pebble beneath you. You learn it from a grizzled old man missing half his teeth and most of his hearing. His name might be Arn or maybe Orm, you're never really sure. What he lacks in hygiene, he makes up for in battlefield wisdom, and tonight he tells you how to sleep like a soldier. Make the earth your friend, or it'll break your bones before dawn. You watch him dig a shallow dip in the ground with the side of his hand, nothing dramatic, just a small hollow where his hips and shoulders will go. Keeps you from rocking side to side all night, he mutters. Keeps the warmth in too, like a nest. Then he sprinkles straw into it, crunchy, yellow, slightly damp straw stolen from the last village the army passed. You follow his lead, making your own pathetic little earth bed, though your hands aren't calloused enough yet, and you get a splinter almost immediately. The straw is itchy. Some of it smells suspiciously like goat, but once you lie down, it makes all the difference. It lifts you just enough off the ground to stop the worst of the cold from leaching into your spine. Add in your cloak and the extra linen tunic you've been hoarding in your satchel, and you've created something resembling a sleep station. Not comfortable, no, but survivable. This is the secret art of sleeping in medieval camps, layers between you and the ground. Not just above you, beneath. If you can manage a layer of straw, leaves, or even bundled up brushwood beneath your body, you're halfway to not freezing. Some soldiers gather pine boughs or fallen hay. Others use cloaks they're not wearing as a bedroll. You even hear a guy joke once that he slept on a stack of shields once, though you can't tell if he's exaggerating or just bragging about his back pain. In some rare cases, especially when the army had the time to settle in for more than a night, they'd dig proper trenches, flat-bottomed, shallow pits lined with wood planks or straw to sleep in. It's called a dug-in sleeping trench, and while it sounds like a last resort survival move, it was actually considered smart fieldcraft. Some commanders encouraged it, others didn't bother, too focused on marching to the next bloody engagement. So depending on your leadership, you either got to sleep in a clever foxhole or, more likely, on whatever dryish ground you could find behind the latrine ditch. Your own patch of dirt tonight is slightly sloped, but at least it isn't swampy. You keep your boots close, off, but within arm's reach. Some soldiers sleep with them on, but that's a surefire way to get trench foot in a week. You've heard horror stories of men waking up with their toes black and curling, but you've also heard of guys who took their boots off and never saw them again. Stolen by deserters, traded away by some low-ranking weasel for food or firewood. Trust no one. Sleep light. As the night stretches on, you hear the sounds of the camp change. Fewer voices now, more coughs, more sniffling. Someone nearby is quietly chewing what sounds like hard bread, probably saving his better rations for daylight. You're too tired to eat. The fire closest to you is dim now, reduced to glowing logs and the occasional sputter of sap. There's no talking around it, just the sound of people existing as quietly as possible. The kind of silence that's not peaceful but fragile. You catch a few men doing what you're too cold to attempt, lying on their backs and staring at the sky. Some nights it's worth it. The stars here, free from city smoke, clear and sharp in the freezing air, are endless. But tonight there's too much cloud cover, and maybe even the threat of rain. You bury your head under your cloak to preserve what little heat your face is still holding onto. Everything smells like damp wool and smoke. You're starting to forget what warmth really feels like. Here's a fun historical tidbit to frost your toes a little more. Some medieval commanders believed that the best way to make soldiers hard for battle was to keep them half-starved and half-frozen. Comfort made men soft, they said. So sometimes even when proper materials for shelter were available, extra straw, blankets, or Or portable tents, they were rationed or even withheld. A sort of forced Spartan conditioning. You try not to think too hard about that as you shift on your straw bundle, trying to ignore the sharp edge of something digging into your hip. Possibly a root, possibly a coin you forgot was in your pouch. On the fringe side of history, there's a strange rumour you once heard from a Breton soldier, that sleeping directly on the ground lets the earth drink your strength. He claimed that's why he carried a wooden sleeping board, shaped to his back and strapped to his pack like a shield. You don't know if he's still alive or if his board helped him live longer. You never saw him again after that muddy spring in Burgundy. Academics still debate just how common it was for soldiers to carry proper bedding materials, whether it was part of a soldier's standard kit or something improvised from campaign to campaign. Some sources mention sleeping cloaks and bedclothes listed in army provisions, especially for long marches, but others suggest that any comfort beyond a basic woolen cloak was a luxury. And in most cases, if you didn't bring it with you, you weren't getting it at all. You shift again, trying to stretch one leg without letting in the chill, and the straw rustles beneath you like dry paper. You're thankful for it now, even if it means you'll itch for days. You wonder how the soldiers in warmer climates slept, if they laughed at stories like this, sipping watered wine in desert air, wrapped in linen and smugness. But tonight, this is your life. A shallow dirt bed, straw insulation, layers of scratchy, smoke-infused clothing wrapped tightly enough to make a mummy jealous. And somehow you start to sleep. Not well, not deeply, but your breathing slows and the cold dulls to something tolerable. You let your mind drift, not quite dreaming, but not awake either. A kind of suspended animation, where you wait for the sun to rise or a blade to fall, whichever comes first. Somewhere out in the darkness, a man with rank sleeps in a tent. An actual honest-to-God tent, with walls and a roof, and, if the rumours are true, even a candle flickering inside like a warm star in its own tiny sky. You don't see the inside of it, not directly, but you've caught glimpses when the flap swings open for a heartbeat. Wool blankets stacked like treasure, furs thrown carelessly over folding stools, and sometimes a second man, a squire or a page moving quietly in the background, tending to the knight's gear or helping him undress before bed like he's royalty. That's how the other half sleeps in a medieval battle camp. The tent isn't big, most aren't. This isn't a royal procession, it's a mobile war camp. The officers' tents are simple A-frames, made of thick canvas or oiled linen, designed more to keep out the rain and wind than to impress anyone. But even that canvas is luxury. It blocks the bite of the wind, dulls the sound of snoring neighbours, and most importantly, keeps the damp off your bones. You dream of canvas. You would kill for canvas. Well, you're already here to kill people, technically, but you'd extra kill for it. Inside the tent, things are arranged with a precision that says, I am not freezing to death like the rest of you. There might be a ground sheet, made of leather or thick cloth, a bedroll, certainly, possibly even stuffed with down or feathers if the officer's noble, or just rich and prepared. A fur-lined cloak is draped over the foot of the bedding. Some have candle lanterns or oil lamps, hung carefully to avoid setting the whole thing ablaze. The light spills through the seam sometimes, golden and warm, and the rest of the camp hates it with a quiet, bone-deep envy. You don't just get a tent. You either buy one with your own coin, steal one, or have the kind of status where someone else carries it for you. Officers, knights, wealthy mercenaries, they're the ones with tents. Everyone else? Dirt and sky, that's the division. Not just of class, but of temperature. Still, tents aren't perfect. The canvas sweats when it rains, dripping slow, cold droplets right onto your forehead. If you light a fire inside, and some do, it's a gamble between warmth and asphyxiation. Smoke builds up fast. That's why some cut little vents into the sides or rig up open flaps. But even then, there's always the risk that you nod off and wake up to find your blanket smouldering or your eyebrows gone. One officer in your battalion nearly burned down half the command tents trying to make roasted chestnuts over a brazier. He now sleeps outside with everyone else. The fire got the chestnuts, but not his pride. You sometimes linger near the tents, not too close, just close enough to catch the smell of wax or the faint perfume of someone who still owns soap. Occasionally a servant brings out something warm, stew, mulled wine, a damp cloth. The scent drifts past the rank and file like a cruel dream. You hear muttering when it happens. It's not hatred exactly, just hunger. For food, for comfort, for warmth, all the things you're not getting tonight. But the tents aren't all glamour. You hear stories. One night, after a brutal march through sleet, was discovered dead in his tent the next morning, suffocated under the weight of too many wet furs. Another woke to find his tent flaps cut open and half his gear gone, stolen while he soared. Comfort is a risk. A bubble of safety can become a trap if you're not careful. You remember that as you tug your cloak tighter, feeling the wind crawl under the hem like a cold snake. Tents vary wildly depending on time and region. In some 15th century English campaigns, the Royal Army travelled with entire wagon trains of modular tents, canvas palaces really, with separate rooms and raised beds. But for most officers, tents were modest and utilitarian. One French campaign ledger even records sleeping tents of oxhide reinforced with wooden slats. The hide smelled awful but shed rain better than cloth. Some Scandinavian troops used half tents, just enough for a man to curl under like a shell, better than nothing if you had it. Here's a quirky side note you'll love. Some German mercenaries brought folding camp furniture. Actual folding chairs and once, reportedly, a collapsible wine rack. Imagine that, your joints freezing solid outside while someone 2 tents over is sipping warmed mead from a carved cup beside a travel table. Medieval glamping. It makes your straw pillow feel like punishment. But even with canvas and furs and padded bedding, sleep doesn't come easily to officers either. Rank doesn't erase anxiety. If anything, it adds to it. They lie awake, replaying troop movements, fretting over enemy formations, wondering if the camp perimeter is truly secure. You've seen commanders wake up at dawn looking like they haven't slept at all. One even muttered in his sleep, nonsense phrases and orders for horses to run backward. Leadership might come with a tent, but it doesn't come with peace of mind. There's still debate among historians about just how common tents were for non-noble soldiers. Some argue that larger armies carried spare tents in wagons and distributed them among the men, especially during long campaigns. Others point out how little evidence there is in common soldiers' records. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Tents for the few, makeshift shelters for the rest, and sky for everyone else. A hierarchy written in fabric. Tonight, you're on the outside looking in. You shift on your earth bed, the straw beneath you damp but doing its job. Your cloak is wrapped around your shoulders like a final defence against the wind. The officer's tent nearby glows softly, a candle flickering like a far-off star you'll never reach. You stare at it until your eyes blur, and then, finally, you roll over and let the darkness take you. You don't dream, you don't even sleep fully. But for a while, you exist in a place between exhaustion and unconsciousness, where the only thing keeping you alive is the thin line of warmth between your skin and the cold earth below. You're learning that in a medieval war camp, sleep is less about comfort and more about calculation, like playing chess with your own body heat. Every choice you make before bedding down is a wager against the cold. Do you sleep with your cloak over your face to trap the warmth? Or do you risk breathing in the wool rot stench all night and waking up with your nose crusted shut? Do you keep your gloves on even though they're damp, or take them off and let your fingers go numb? This is the nightly mental math of survival. Layering becomes its own science. You're not dressing for style here, you're layering like your life depends on it. Because it does. First comes the linen undershirt, thin, almost useless on its own, but great for keeping sweat off your wool, then your wool tunic. Over that, a second tunic if you've got one, maybe thicker, rougher, something stitched by a mother or wife and shoved into your pack months ago. Then the gambeson, the heavy quilted jacket you wore under your chainmail all day. It's stiff with dried sweat and blood at the cuffs, but it's warm and padded. Finally, the cloak, wool again, often lined with sheepskin if you're lucky, or just heavy enough to double as both blanket and armour against the wind. You wrap yourself up like a half-dead caterpillar trying to cocoon its way to morning. Your legs are swaddled in woolen hose, and if you are smart enough to keep them dry, you might actually feel your knees come sunrise. On your feet, socks made from woven wool, plus the inside lining of your boots if they aren't frozen solid. Someone nearby tied bits of rabbit fur around his ankles, and now he swears he's the warmest man in camp. You believe him. You'd consider killing him for that fur. The body heat under your layers starts to build up slowly. It doesn't feel warm exactly, it just feels less cold. Your breath starts to stay in your hood, warming the air around your neck, and you feel the beginnings of sweat where your tunics press tight against your ribs. But this is where it gets tricky. Sweat is the enemy. If you sweat too much, it'll freeze inside your layers when the temperature drops further, and then your own body becomes your worst enemy. So you start adjusting, loosening the laces on your gambeson just a little, letting a whisper of cool air in. It's a balance game you never thought you'd have to learn. Some of the more experienced soldiers have tricks. One keeps a cloth wrapped around his chest, tucked beneath everything else. It's nothing fancy, just an old rag, but he says it keeps his core warm longer. Another layers dried grass between his shirts. You think that's madness, until he wakes up tomorrow not shivering while you're curled up like a shrimp on a frozen rock. Historical records paint a surprisingly varied picture when it comes to sleepwear in medieval armies. Common foot soldiers wore their daily clothing, tunic, hose, cloak, and maybe added an extra layer if they were lucky. But there's mention in certain inventories of night shirts, made of flannel or fine wool issued to some troops, especially in northern Europe during cold campaigns. These were the exception, not the rule, and usually reserved for officers or elite units. For most soldiers, sleeping attire was just less wet battle wear. Here's a quirky historical footnote. Some 12th century Scandinavian levies were issued wool onesies, well, not literally onesies, but full-body wool underclothes with a single seam down the back. Apparently they were prized not just for warmth, but because lice had fewer places to hide. You're not sure if that's better or worse. Fewer lice, more itching wool. Tonight the cold is steady, not bitter, not deadly, just constant, like a pressure that never lifts. You're starting to settle in. Muscles softening under the weight of your clothing when someone shifts nearby and lets out a long, low groan. Not pain, just exhaustion. It's a sound you've started to recognise, the sigh of someone whose body is giving up on complaint. Sleep comes in layers too. First your hands relax, then your chest stops twitching from the shivers, then your legs forget they exist. Your eyes close even though you can still hear everything. The creak of leather, the rustle of wool, the slow breathing of the men around you. You're in a field full of wool-wrapped human burritos, each one hoping to make it through the night without losing a toe or a sense of sanity. There's still debate among historians about whether medieval armies encouraged soldiers to bring specific sleepwear. Some records imply personal responsibility. If you didn't bring something warm, that was your own bad planning. Others suggest that certain armies, especially the more centralised ones like France or England in the later Middle Ages, issued basic winter clothing before campaigns. But those were rare moments of organisation in a messy, chaotic world. Most soldiers had to improvise. Someone nearby lets out a quiet curse, pulling his cloak tighter. You don't know his name, you just know he snores like a cow and has a habit of muttering in his sleep about cheese. But tonight, you feel a weird sort of camaraderie with him. You're both just piles of bones under too much wool, clinging to the edge of sleep in a world that's cold, cruel, and never quiet. Eventually, your breath slows. The layers are working. You're not warm exactly, but you're wrapped tight enough to forget that you're freezing. You're weightless in your cocoon of damp wool and itchy hope. You let go, just for a little while. You don't so much wake up as you get gently shoved back into awareness by the unmistakable scent of singed leather. Someone's boot has gotten too close to the fire. Again. You open one crusty eye to see a thin column of smoke spiralling up from a blackened heel, while the boot's owner snores on, blissfully unaware that he's about 5 minutes away from losing footwear, and possibly a toe. You don't bother warning him. He'll figure it out when the smell becomes unbearable or when his foot starts to roast. This is what passes for morning in the middle of a medieval war camp. Burnt gear, half-frozen limbs, and the sour taste of stale air trapped under your own hood. Your own boots are safe, barely. You'd taken them off before curling up, stuffed them inside your cloak near your chest like two sad, muddy children. It's a common trick. Cold boots are miserable. Frozen boots can snap like old wood when you try to put them on, so everyone tries to keep theirs warm through sheer body heat, even if it means waking up with boot buckles digging into your ribs. It's just another compromise in the endless war against frostbite. You sit up slowly, your joints protest. Every muscle feels like it's been quietly freezing into statue form all night. And now the thawing is somehow worse. Your gambeson is stiff, creased at the elbows like cardboard. Your fingers tingle with pins and needles, and your knees feel like they're made of rusted hinges. You flex them slowly, gritting your teeth. It's not pain exactly, it's the price of survival. You paid in warmth. Now you collect in stiffness. The fire in the centre of your little sleep cluster is almost out, just a low pile of red embers now, wrapped in a tiny halo of white ash. Someone throws a twig on it, and the glow flares for a second before fading back into sleepy coals. No one speaks. It's too early or too cold or both. Around you, a dozen other men begin to stir, most of them still wrapped up tight in cloaks and blankets like freshly dug corpses deciding whether to return to the living. Back during the night, before sleep claimed you, there was an unspoken ritual, the fire share. It's not as romantic as it sounds, it's just a rotating, miserable dance of who gets to be closest to the warmth and who has to back off to keep from catching fire. Too close and you wake up choking on smoke with your eyebrows singed. Too far and your limbs go numb. Everyone plays this game twisting and rotating like spit-roasted pigs around the embers. One guy, the one who chews in his sleep, figured out that placing his shield between himself and the fire helped direct the heat toward his body. A crude heat reflector. It kind of works, until someone kicks the shield over or a breeze shifts the smoke into everyone's faces. You once tried laying stones around the fire to soak up warmth, and then wrapping them in cloth to tuck against your stomach while sleeping. It worked beautifully. Right up until the moment one burned a hole through the hem of your tunic. Live and learn, you wouldn't think it, but fire becomes a sort of currency out here. Whoever tends it well shares it generously, and keeps it live through the night earns quiet respect. Whoever hogs it, feeds it badly, or lets it die becomes the enemy faster than any man in armour across the battlefield. There are unwritten rules. Don't throw green wood on it. Don't steal another man's fire rocks. Don't put your wet boots near the centre, unless you want a cloud of steam to choke everyone out. A good firekeeper is worth his weight in meat rations. Historically, fire maintenance was one of the most important survival skills in a medieval camp. Soldiers often carried flint and steel. But starting a new fire was a last resort, better to tend the one you had. Carefully feeding it through the night and banking the coals beneath ash so it could be revived at dawn. Some units even assign night watch shifts specifically to keep fires alive, not just for cooking and heat, but to keep morale from cracking entirely. Without fire, everything falls apart. Want a strange fact to chew on? In some 13th century Baltic campaigns, soldiers were reportedly trained to sleep in rotational shifts around a fire, not just for warmth, but because they believed spirits of the dead would steal heat from unattended flames. Whether superstition or early thermodynamic awareness, the result was the same. Fires were watched like treasure. But there's also scholarly debate around just how many fires a large medieval army could sustain during long campaigns. Wood was a finite resource, and deforestation around encampments was a real problem. Some argue that in especially large camps, only small shared fires were permitted, while others believe men broke into little circles, each managing their own. The archaeological record shows patterns of fire pits and clusters, suggesting communal heating more than individual. It probably depended on terrain, weather, and how long the army expected to stay in one place. Right now, in your patch of camp, fire is fading and everyone's looking at each other with that unspoken, groggy question: who's going to fix it? Eventually, the guy whose boot is still smouldering blinks awake, notices the smoke, and yanks his foot away with a yelp. Everyone chuckles quietly. Not kindly, but not cruelly either. It's just the way mornings go. His boots scorched, heel curling like old parchment, but still wearable. He kicks dirt at the embers and grumbles something about damn camp ghosts. You reach for your boots and brace yourself for the horrible moment, slipping them on. They're still damp, cold enough to sting your arches, but not frozen, and that's a victory. You do the little hop dance as you force them on, teeth clenched, breath hissing through your nose. Your cloak is stiff around the edges with morning frost. Everything smells of smoke, feet and ash. Still you're up. You're not warm, but you're moving. And in a place like this, that's about the best you can ask for. You glance around the camp, men yawning, rubbing their necks, poking at dying fires like sleepy raccoons. The sky is still black, but you know the grey is coming. And with it, the marching, the fighting, or, if you're lucky, just another cold night like this one. You haven't even finished lacing your boots before nature calls, loudly and without apology. It's the kind of call that doesn't care if the ground is frozen or if your hands are too numb to untie anything. You groan, adjust your cloak, and trudge off toward the outer edge of camp, guided by nothing but memory and a vague scent of regret. Welcome to the glamorous life of the medieval foot soldier. Dawn patrol straight to the piss trench. You don't have a proper latrine, of course. This isn't a fortified garrison with carved stone channels and flagstone floors. This is a battlefield bivouac, which means someone dug a shallow ditch last night about 50 yards downwind of the sleeping line, tossed some old straw into it, and called it a miracle of sanitation. If you're lucky, no one's fallen in yet. The cold hits harder the farther you get from the fire pits. Your breath fogs in the air like smoke from a dying candle, and you walk quickly, not just to beat the cold, but to escape the sound of everyone else groaning through their own early morning rituals. Somewhere behind you, someone dry heaves. Someone else curses at a rat. You just keep walking, eyes low, boots crunching through frost-covered grass. When you finally reach the latrine trench, the smell greets you first. It's an aggressive, layered thing. Old waste, newer waste, waste that may or may not be human. It clings to the air, seeps into your nostrils, and leaves a film on your tongue if you breathe wrong. You do what needs doing as fast as physically possible, shivering the entire time, squatting like an unhappy gargoyle. There's no privacy here. No shame either, really. Everyone's too tired, too cold, or too dead inside to care. You lock eyes with another soldier on his way out. He looks like he hasn't slept in 3 days and hasn't blinked in 2. You nod. He nods back. It's the kind of silent disagreement only people who've shared a pit toilet in 30-degree weather can understand, but just as you're about to return to the warmish ember circle of camp, you hear the dreaded whisper of chainmail shifting. Not close, but not far either. And it's not a natural camp sound, it's too deliberate. Not the lazy rustle of someone sitting up. This has weight, movement. You freeze, instantly alert. You crouch lower behind a sad-looking bush that offers exactly zero protection from anything besides judgment. That's when it hits you. You've drawn the shift. The dreaded night watch. Or maybe it's morning watch now, depending on how generously the sergeant decides to define dawn. Either way, your name was called in the dark, mumbled by someone with more authority than energy, and now you're part of the handful of soldiers responsible for making sure nobody sneaks in to slaughter the camp, while the rest are busy trying not to freeze their kidneys off. You sigh, deeply, loud enough to fog the air around your chin like dragon breath. You'd hoped someone had forgotten, that you could slip through the night unnoticed, tucked beneath your cloak like a cowardly burrito. But here you are, cold, awake, and now on sentry duty. Night watches in a medieval camp aren't rotations of honour. They're punishments handed out by necessity. Someone has to do it, and that someone is always you. Or at least it feels that way. You take your place just beyond the camp's edge, pacing slowly between 2 frost-tipped trees. Your breath fogs like a signal. Your ears strain to hear anything that isn't the rustle of tents or the shuffle of sleeping men. Every snap of a twig becomes a potential death sentence. Every owl hoot makes you reach for your knife. Historically, night watches were one of the most dangerous and important parts of camp life. A sleeping army is a vulnerable army, and even the most heavily armoured force is nothing but meat if caught unaware. Watch shifts varied from 1 to 4 hours, depending on how desperate or disciplined the command structure was. Often soldiers were paired off, both for conversation and to make sure one didn't fall asleep, because yes, that happened. A lot. And the punishment was usually worse than just a stern talking to. Sometimes it was lashes, sometimes it was being made to stand bare-chested before dawn, sometimes it was getting stabbed in your sleep because you missed the enemy crawling in. And here's a lovely little fringe detail. Some commanders in the High Middle Ages used watchstones, large rocks placed along the perimeter that sentries had to physically touch every 15 minutes or so to prove they were awake. Miss A stone? That's a sign you are either dead or sleeping. You almost prefer the death option. You shuffle your feet, clenching and unclenching your hands in your gloves to keep the circulation going. Somewhere in the darkness something rustles. A deer? A scout? A hallucination from lack of sleep? You squint, heart thudding in your ears. It's nothing. Probably. You stay alert anyway. Because that's the game. Keep watch or get watched by someone who might not be friendly. There's debate among scholars over how well medieval night watches actually worked. Some argue they were more symbolic than effective, just a token effort at discipline that didn't really stop surprise attacks. Others point to successful repulsions of ambushes as proof that the watch system, while imperfect, was essential. Regardless of the debate, one thing is certain. Nobody liked doing it, and everyone prayed they wouldn't be the one on duty when the wolves or the enemy came knocking. Eventually, a quiet voice calls your name from the shadows, your replacement blessed and grumpy, rubbing sleep from his eyes. You nod to him and head back toward the camp, your shift done, your nerves fried, your body colder than ever. But you didn't die, and neither did anyone else. That's as good as a victory out here. By the time you settle back onto your makeshift straw mattress, the sky is starting to grey. You pull your cloak over your head again and close your eyes, knowing full well you'll only get maybe 30 minutes before the camp starts waking for real. you'll take them anyway. Even bad sleep is still sleep, and out here, that's the closest thing to mercy you'll find. You can tell it's going to be a nightmare of a day when the first thing you taste is ice. Not snow, ice. Your water skin is frozen stiff, its contents sloshing around like slurred apologies from winter itself, and your cloak, once damp and pliable, is now a frozen husk draped across your shoulders like a reluctant corpse. It crunches when you move. That's never a good sign. Today, the cold isn't just an inconvenience. It's a full-blown campaign against your will to live. Welcome to a winter campaign. These are the ones legends are made of, not because they're too glorious or noble, but because it's amazing anyone made it out alive. Sleeping in a medieval camp is hard in spring. In winter, it's a constant negotiation with frostbite madness and the unique misery of trying to scrape ice off your face without peeling the skin beneath. Snow has fallen overnight. Not a soft, poetic dusting either. It's that heavy, wet kind that sticks to everything and turns tents into collapsing, soggy nightmares. You sit up slowly, cloak cracking at the folds, your straw bedding matted with a thin crust of frost. Even the breath coming from your nostrils is sluggish heavy, curling in front of your face like smoke from an angry ghost. And your hands, well, your hands no longer feel like hands, more like two pale, reluctant slabs of meat at the end of your arms. In this kind of cold, sleeping becomes abstract. You don't sleep so much as pass out and hope your body remembers to keep functioning. Even breathing is hard. Your nose runs, then freezes. You try to wipe it and your glove sticks to your face, You pry it off carefully, muttering curses, and pull your hood down tighter. Somewhere nearby, someone's trying to thaw his cloak by slapping it against a log. The slap echoes. The cloak does not thaw. Thaw. Winter tents, if you're lucky enough to be near one, are sagging under the weight of wet snow. Most weren't made for this. They are meant for rain, for cool nights, not this cruel bone-splitting cold. Some officers have doubled up their canvas, thrown extra hides over the top, and even built low walls of snow around the edges as insulation. It kind of works if you stay inside all night and don't move. But the air inside freezes anyway. There's no such thing as warm air when the snow is still falling through the gaps in your seams. You try to start a fire. Everyone does. But the wood is wet, the kind of wet that hisses and bets as it steams instead of burn. You've seen men gather around a fireless fire pit just to pretend they're warmer. One guy starts humming loudly while rubbing his hands over a cold pile of logs, trying to trick himself into feeling heat. No one laughs, everyone just watches and kind of agrees with the logic. To survive this kind of night, some soldiers build what you generously call snow tents. They are not tents really, more like little igloo-shaped shelters made from packed snow and lined with pine branches, hay, or if you're desperate, horse dung. Warm? No. Insulate? Surprisingly, yes. The trick is to crawl inside and seal it behind you with a bit of hide or a cloak, breathing into the narrow space to raise the temperature just enough to avoid death. You sweat inside, freeze outside, either way you lose, and if there's no snow to build with, you dig. Trenches, shallow pits carved into the dirt to lie in, often with brush or broken shields as windbreaks. You've seen guys sleep under overturned carts, and you once met a soldier who claimed he survived an entire winter campaign by sleeping inside a dead horse. You're not sure if that's true. You didn't ask follow-up questions. The smell alone probably kept him company for the rest of his life. Historical records from winter campaigns are bleak. Chronicles from the Teutonic campaigns in Prussia, or the many grim winters during the 100 Years' War, describe soldiers dying not from battle, but from exposure. Entire units freezing in their sleep. Men who bedded down healthy and simply didn't rise in the morning. One chronicle coldly records, found stiff in prayer, mouth agape. It's not exactly the bedtime story you want, but it's the one you're living now. The fringe fact of the night. In some parts of Eastern Europe, soldiers in the 14th century carried hot stones in cloth satchels under their armour, or next to their hearts during cold nights. These were heated in the fire just before bed, then wrapped tightly to avoid burns. If you've never tried hugging a warm rock like it's your last remaining friend, you haven't truly experienced medieval warfare. Modern scholars debate the effectiveness of all these methods, snow huts, heated stones, layered furs, but most agree on one point. Surviving the night was more about instinct and luck than planning. Supplies ran low, fires went out, men rolled over into the cold side of the ground and never got back up. When your body stops shivering, it's usually a sign you're not coming back. As for you, you're still here. You're shivering violently, and you're muttering into your scarf like a crazy monk, but you're here. You shuffle toward the nearest group of soldiers gathered around a reluctant fire, most of them silent, eyes glassy from exhaustion. One is holding his hand over the coals, skin raw and red, not pulling back despite the risk. Another has wrapped his entire face in a woolen scarf, eyes peeking out like a walking blanket. No one greets you, there's no energy for that. You sit with them anyway, stare at the coals, think about warmth the way starving men think about bread. You wonder again why you're here, why any of you are here, but there's no answer in the fire, no answer in the snow, just another day of cold and another night of trying not to die in your sleep. You're starting to learn that warmth in a medieval camp isn't just a battle against the weather, it's a battle against biology. And tonight, as you settle into your now all too familiar patch of damp earth and chewed straw, you find yourself locked in a three-way war. Against the cold, against sleep, and against things that scurry. Because somewhere in your bedroll, somewhere, a field mouse has decided to declare war on your sanity. At first, you think you're imagining it. A soft rustle, a tiny scratch. Could be the wind, you tell yourself. Could it be someone shifting nearby? Could be your own cloak settling. But then you feel it. A tickle near your hip. And you know, something is sharing your blanket, and it has far more energy than you do. You leap up, not gracefully, not even quickly, more like a frozen sloth startled from hibernation, and start shaking your bedroll like a lunatic. A few men grunt in protest nearby. One groans, "Not again," like this is a common occurrence. Because it is. And not just mice, fleas, lice, ticks, all the charming little bedfellows of medieval camp life. The minute your body becomes warmer than the surrounding ground, it's like putting out a vacancy sign for vermin. You manage to evict the mouse, possibly two, and resettle your nest, tucking in the corners of your cloak, double-checking your hood, and even folding your spare sock into a loose plug to cover the hole near your ribs where the mouse first snuck in. You lie back down with the kind of cautious dread only someone who's been mouse-cuddled in the night can understand. The fur blankets help, at least. You've gotten your hands on one, not honestly, mind you. It was a trade of sorts. One guy needed a new whetstone, you had one. He had fur. The deal was struck without words. The fur smells like goat and old sweat, and you're 90% sure it still contains half the original goat. But it's warm, scratchy, oily, questionably acquired, but warm. Historically, fur was prized in camps not just for warmth, but as a kind of status symbol. Fox, wolf, even squirrel, anything that once had a pulse and a fluffy coat ended up draped over sleeping soldiers. The higher the rank, the thicker the fur. Some knights travelled with entire bundles of pelts just for bedding. Others foraged, which is a polite way of saying they took what they wanted from villages that had no real way to say no. Fur-lined cloaks, fur-lined boots, fur-lined hoods, you'd wrap yourself in an entire forest if it kept you alive till morning. Of course, fur had its own problems. It held in heat, yes, but it also held in fleas. And fleas didn't sleep. You could go to bed wrapped in luxury and wake up looking like you'd lost a fistfight with a hive of angry bees. Some soldiers smoked their furs over the fire to kill the fleas. Others doused them in vinegar. A few just accepted the itching as part of the package and scratched until they bled. You've chosen the smoke method. Earlier tonight you waved your cloak through the fire's edge, letting the smoke curl into the fibres, hoping it would discourage anything that crawled. It helped. Probably. You're still itchy, but now at least you smell like burned goat hair instead of just cold misery. And then there's the other option, sharing. Not blankets, body heat. 2 or more soldiers curled up under the same cloak, back to back or front to front, depending on desperation levels. It's not romantic. It's not even friendly most of the time. It's practical. A warm body is a warm body, and if you're not using one to your advantage, you're probably dead or freezing soon. You've seen the toughest men in camp, covered in scars and stories, snuggling like scared children under a single threadbare cloak. No one mocks them. No one dares. Because the only thing colder than the night is shame, and in this camp, nobody has room for that. You've done it yourself once or twice, usually with someone equally miserable and always with your knives kept within reach, just in case. There's a strange moment in the night when everything stops feeling awful. Not because it's better, because your body gives up, Your nerves go numb, your skin stops complaining, and your mind slips into a shallow pool of calm. You're not asleep, you're not awake, you're just there, existing. The fur against your cheek is coarse, the dirt beneath you has a rock digging into your hip. Something tickles the back of your neck. You don't even care anymore. Here's a weird little historical detail to chew on, while you try not to think about mice. Some soldiers in the far north used hollowed animal carcasses for warmth, not as a shelter, as a bed. A freshly skinned deer or goat could serve as a windproof sleeping bag for someone desperate enough. The idea was to stuff yourself inside before the body heat fully left the animal. Horrific? Absolutely. Effective? Reportedly. And also probably the reason why medieval doctors never got bored. Modern scholars still argue about how bad the vermin situation really was in medieval camps. Some say the infestation levels are exaggerated, the product of a few dramatic chroniclers. Others point to the countless references in letters and journals, soldiers complaining of the bite of the unseen army, night crawlers that feast while we rest, or famously, a beard of fleas on my belly come morning. You believe every word of it. You've lived every word of it. Back in your bedroll, you adjust your layers again, wincing as you find the cold spot where the mouse had briefly claimed squatters' rights. You shift your body away from it and press your back closer to your neighbour. Neither of you says a word. The silence is full of understanding and exhaustion. The night stretches on. The fire nearby is nearly out again. You could get up, poke at it, find dry twigs, coaxing it back to life. But you don't. You stay still, because movement means cold and cold means pain. Better to lie here, wrapped in goat fur and paranoia, and wait for the grey light of morning. You've heard the saying, sleep with one eye open a dozen times. It's usually said like a joke, wry, knowing, like someone preparing for betrayal in a card game. But out here it's not a saying, it's a rule, it's instinct. It's the thing your body does all on its own after a few nights in a war camp, where the only thing between you and a blade to the ribs is a thin wool cloak and whatever reflexes haven't frozen stiff. You don't sleep so much as hover at the edge of unconsciousness, always listening, always ready to spring into useless motion the moment you hear something you shouldn't. Tonight, the air is razor sharp with silence. No wind, no distant howling, not even the usual snoring from the man 3 feet to your right, the one who normally snores so loud the rats leave camp out of fear. It's so still, so unnervingly quiet, that your mind fills the space with imagined sounds. The snap of a twig, the brush of a foot on wet leaves, the faint jingle of mail shifting in the dark. Your hand finds the hilt of your knife before you're even fully awake. This is the price of survival. You've learned it slowly, night after night. Real sleep only comes in stolen fragments, like water collected in a cracked bowl. You never dip fully into dreaming, you hover just above it, like a bird circling a frozen pond, trying to judge if it's safe to land. Your body learns how to keep your ears alert even when your limbs shut down. And when something moves, anything, you wake instantly. Heart pounding, mouth dry, muscles tensed, unsure if they should run, strike, or pretend you're dead. A few nights ago, someone did get too close. A figure moving between tents, slowly, like a Bashtung shadow learning to walk. No armour, no insignia. You saw them from your bedroll, their silhouette just a little too upright, their steps too deliberate. You didn't move, you just watched. Let your eyes track them through the dark. They passed you by, vanished into the black, and you never saw them again. No one else mentioned it the next morning. You still wonder if it was real. You don't talk about it. Some soldiers do sleep in partial armour. Not full plate, only someone trying to kill themselves would try that. But a padded jack, a mail collar, maybe even greaves. Just enough to take the edge off a surprise attack. But armour is loud, stiff, and more importantly cold. Iron and steel become bone-chilling ice in the night, sucking the heat right out of your skin. So most choose to risk it. Leave the armour off, the blade nearby, and sleep light. One eye open, always. The perimeter guards do their best. You know this because you've pulled that duty yourself, stomping through frost-covered grass, rubbing your hands, peering into the darkness, and trying not to imagine every stump as a crouching enemy. But even the most disciplined guard can't be everywhere at once. You've heard stories, hell, you've seen it happen, of camps raided just before dawn when men are at their lowest. The quiet before morning is when the knives come out. Historically, night raids were terrifyingly effective. Small squads of enemy scouts would sneak past the perimeter, cut throats in the sleeping line, and vanish into the trees before the camp even realised what had happened. Some units took to sleeping in shifts, especially near enemy territory. Others created noise traps, lines of tin cups, bones or twigs strung between posts to create racket if someone tried to sneak through. Primitive, but occasionally effective. One particularly clever trick you learned from a Bohemian soldier involved a belt of bells tied around his ankle while he slept. If someone tried to move him or roll him over, jingle, panic, blade in hand before the attacker even finished sneaking. Of course, so you once saw a guy try it who ended up kicking himself all night and waking up more bruised than rested, so it's not perfect. The fringiest, weirdest idea you've heard came from a mercenary who claimed he could sense assassins in his sleep by dreaming of drowning. Said every time he had that dream, he'd wake up with a blade at his throat. He carried a tiny bag of salt under his tongue while he slept. Said it helped him wake faster. Maybe it worked. Maybe he was just crazy. He also talked to his boots. There's still debate among historians about how much sleep paranoia was real versus exaggerated after the fact. Some claim soldiers became numb to danger and slept deeply from sheer exhaustion. Others argue that the constant threat of death kept men in a semi-lucid state for entire campaigns. Either way, the truth probably lives somewhere in between. Sleep was possible, but never safe. Tonight, you lie with your knife under your palm, your knees slightly bent, ready to spring up. Not far, not heroically, but just enough to stab at whatever might be creeping toward your blanket. You've practiced it, shamefully, like a soldier rehearsing his own wake-up call. Push off the elbow, twist the hips, blade out. Try not to stab the guy who's just rolling over. Try not to imagine it happening, try not to need it, but always be ready. Your ears twitch at every noise. The creak of someone's belt, the low grunt of a dreaming man, the soft pat of something too light to be human, maybe just a bird, maybe not. You feel your stomach knot for no reason at all. That's what the camp does to you. It sharpens you, keeps your nerves frayed like rope soaked in ice water. Still, eventually, exhaustion wins. Your body lets go just a little. You drift into a shallow sleep, one hand always on your weapon, one eye metaphorically cracked open. It's the best you can do. You've made it another night. Maybe you'll make it another. And another after that, or maybe you won't, but at least you'll see it coming. You don't really appreciate your gambeson until the second night of rain. Not the nice kind of rain, the kind poets use as metaphors for longing. No. This is the sideways, cold, relentless kind that soaks through everything you own, including your patience, and then laughs in your face. Your cloak is already wet, your boots have turned into puddle-wearing devices, but your gambeson, that old sweat-crusted, blood-flecked quilted jacket you've cursed 1,000 times, that thing is doing heroic work. It's thick, heavier than it looks. Layers of linen or wool stuffed with rag padding and stitched tight like someone took a mattress, beat it into submission, and then told you to wear it to war. It's meant to go under armour, soften the blow of a sword or arrow. But tonight, it's your bed, your blanket, your last line of defence between you and the cold, uncaring sky. You lie back, letting the rain tap gently. No, mockingly against the hood pulled over your head. Every drop is a reminder that comfort is a distant concept. The straw you stuffed beneath you is wet now, flattened and clinging to your back like straw-flavoured leeches. Your fingers are too stiff to curl properly. But your gambeson holds some heat. Not a lot. Just enough to remind you what warmth was before the rain stole it. A guy across the fire, what's left of the fire anyway, is trying to dry his own gambeson by laying it on a flat stone near the embers. It smells like roast death. You all watch, silently hoping the flames catch it, if only for entertainment. It doesn't burn, but it steams like a dying beast. Someone sneezes violently. No one says bless you. Here's the thing, gambesons weren't designed to be slept in. They're stiff, bulky. After a few weeks of use, they smell like battlefield soup, sweat of fear, blood, and something you think is cheese. But when it's cold or wet, you wear it anyway. Because while it may be uncomfortable, it's one of the few things you have that actually traps heat. It's like a wearable oven mitt, if the oven mitt also sometimes gave you shoulder blisters. Some men use theirs as pillows when the weather's kind. Others fold it under their knees to keep from locking up by morning. You've met one guy who claimed he wrapped his newborn in a cut-down gambeson during a forced march. Said it was the only time the baby didn't cry. Probably because it was suffocating, but hey, warm is warm. The real secret of the gambeson, though, is dual use. It's battle gear and bedding. Utility at its medieval finest. It doesn't make sleep easy, but it makes sleep possible. You can wrap it around yourself like a blanket, tuck it under your back as insulation, or just lie inside it like a man-sized pie filling and hope your core temperature doesn't drop too low. When wet, it's miserable. When frozen, it's worse. But when dry, it's survival. Historically, soldiers were issued gambesons more often than any other kind of armour. Mail and plate were expensive, reserved for the well-off or the well-connected. But padded armour? That was the people's armour. It took time to make, stitching layer after layer, but it was effective and cheapish. Some units wore only that into battle. Others used it beneath chainmail, hoping to reduce the bruising from a mace to something less than internal soup. Fringe fact, some monks in the 13th century made gambesons not for war, but as penance garments. Self-inflicted discomfort as a path to holiness. Imagine choosing to wear one on purpose, not to avoid getting stabbed, but to feel closer to God. That's dedication, or insanity, probably both. There's also still debate over what exactly was used for padding inside them. Some say horsehair. Others insist on rags, moss, or even raw wool. The truth is, it probably varied wildly depending on where you were, who was sewing it, and how desperate your quartermaster was. You've seen gambesons patched with everything from burlap to parchment. One guy swears his had pieces of old prayer scrolls inside, said they kept him safe, or maybe just itchy. Back in your own sodden slice of misery, you shift inside your damp shell. The gambeson creaks at the shoulders like an old door, resisting every movement. You try to find a dry patch of collar to rest your cheek against, but it doesn't exist. You settle for least soaked and exhale slowly, watching the breath curl away and vanish into the damp dark above. Around you, others are huddling in their own padded gear, some still wearing it, some using it like bedding. One guy has stuffed straw into the sleeves to puff it up, trying to make a sad pillow. It kind of works, until he rolls over and a slug slides out of the cuff and onto his face, but he doesn't scream, he just wipes it away and closes his eyes again. You're all past screaming, past complaint. You're just here to endure. Eventually your limbs grow too heavy to move, your jaw unclenches, the rain softens to a drizzle, the world turns into grey mist and itchy fabric. Your gambeson cradles your body, not gently, not kindly, but firmly, like an overprotective bear that forgot how to be soft. You don't fall asleep exactly, you just stop noticing things. The pain in your knees, the damp on your back, the freezing tips of your ears, they all fade into a kind of foggy numbness. And the last thing you feel, just before your mind slips under, is the tight, uncomfortable grip of that thick, stubborn bias jacket keeping the cold out. Not perfectly, not even well, but just enough. The smell hits you first. It creeps into your nose before your eyes even open. An ungodly blend of boiled leather, sour meat, and something that might once have been a vegetable but is now best described as suspicious. Welcome to breakfast, or possibly dinner. Time doesn't matter anymore. The sun hasn't fully risen, your body aches like you've been beaten with your own limbs, and someone's got a dented pot bubbling over what remains of the night's fire. You've never been less excited for food, but you're starving. Everyone is. Cold does that to you. It gnaws from the inside out, makes you ravenous even when there's nothing to be hungry for. So when the call goes up, a simple grunt from the pot's guardian, you drag yourself over, boots squishing, shoulders hunched. Still wrapped in your stiffened gambeson. The line forms quickly. There's no real order, just a general understanding that whoever causes a fight before breakfast might find something extra in their stew. Like a tooth, the pot holds a mystery. Could be barley, maybe old beans. Could be the remnants of yesterday's dried meat, rehydrated into strips of chewy despair. What you do know is that it contains water, salt, barely, and the unmistakable aroma of boiled wool. Someone definitely used their socks to filter this. Or worse, warm them up first. Still, the heat alone makes it tempting. You accept your share in a cracked wooden bowl and carry it back to your bedroll like a prize. As you sit, blowing on the steam rising from your makeshift meal, you notice the quiet hiss of something else nearby. A man to your left has taken off his boots and is dangling his socks over the fire on a stick like marshmallows. The smell of wet wool and old feet merges with the stew. You try to breathe through your mouth, but it doesn't help. Everything tastes like smoke and regret now. You sip the stew. It's hot, at least. That's its only virtue. The flavour is non-existent, unless dirt adjacent counts. You chew something unidentifiable, or try not to gag and force it down. It might have been part of an onion. It might have been a fingernail. You don't ask, you don't want answers, you just need the calories. This is how it goes when the supplies run low, when the camp has moved too far from any real village, or the foragers haven't returned with anything worth chewing. You cook what you have. If that means boiling old root vegetables with bits of shoe leather, then so be it. You've heard of men boiling their belts, real leather, the thick kind, just to soften them enough to chew, not for nutrition, just to fool their stomachs into thinking they've eaten. And then there are the stories. You've heard them whispered late at night, always with that strange mix of laughter and horror. Stories about men who cooked their socks. Not washed, cooked. Threw them in the pot with broth just to warm them up before putting them back on. The idea was that the wool would absorb the heat better. Whether that's true or not, you don't know. What you do know is that you've seen it. More than once. One time a man dropped his sock into the stew pot, fished it out, wrung it dry and drank the broth anyway. Said it tasted like home. Everyone laughed. But no one refused their serving, because hunger does strange things. Makes you redefine edible. Makes you lower your standards until you can't remember what flavour even means. You've eaten roots, bark, bits of moss that looked fine. Once a half-burned apple someone tossed aside. It was the best thing you'd tasted all week. Historically, food in medieval campaigns was a patchwork affair. Armies relied heavily on preserved rations, dried meat, hardtack, salted fish, and whatever they could scavenge, buy or steal along the way. Boiled stews were common, not because they were delicious, but because they were practical. One pot, many mouths. Toss in what you had. Grains, wild herbs, old meat, bones for flavour. Boil it all down and hope for the best. And here's a quirky footnote to add to your misery. Some armies believed boiling your socks in stew not only warmed them, but disinfected them. This was, unsurprisingly, not true. It just added a foot-flavoured funk to an already questionable meal. But that didn't stop soldiers from trying. Warm socks were a kind of luxury, even if they tasted faintly of despair. There's still scholarly debate about how nutritious medieval camp meals actually were. Some argue that despite the low quality, they were surprisingly balanced. Grain, fat, salt, and the occasional root vegetable. Others claim malnutrition was rampant, leading to disease, weakness, and eventual death. Not from wounds, but from the simple act of wasting away in a cold ditch. Back in your corner of camp, you finish your stew. You don't remember chewing most of it. You lick the inside of your bowl anyway, wiping the last smears with your thumb and sucking it clean. Not because you enjoyed it, because you need every bit. Your stomach still aches, you're still hungry, but at least you're warmer. A little. You return the bowl to the stack of cracked, greasy dishware beside the fire, and the sock warmer nods to you. His socks are steaming now. He'll put them back on in a minute. You both pretend this is normal. Because it is. You wrap your cloak tighter, draw your knees to your chest, and try not to think about what tonight's stew might be made of. You hope, irrational, that someone found a carrot. Just one. A small, misshapen, frost-bitten carrot. That would be nice. But probably it'll be socks again. At a certain point, sleep stops being something you do and becomes something that happens to you. You don't lie down with a sigh and a fluff of your pillow. What pillow? You don't pull up a blanket. It's a damp cloak. Get over it. You just shut down, wherever you are, whatever position your limbs happen to fall into. And if you're lucky, you don't wake up to someone kicking you in the ribs or stepping on your hand on their way to piss behind a tree. Tonight, the exhaustion isn't like other nights. It's not just tired, it's hollowing. The kind of tired that digs in behind your eyes, sits heavy on your chest and whispers, just collapse. It doesn't matter where. Well, the ground is fine, the fire is out anyway. And eventually you listen. You've just spent 14 hours marching through mud so deep it tried to eat your boots. One guy actually lost a boot in a ditch and had to march the rest of the day in a single stocking, wrapped in rags and unrepentant swearing. No one laughed. You were all too tired to laugh. You passed by the rotted remains of a burned-out farmhouse and didn't even look twice. At this point, unless it's food or firewood, it's invisible. So when the signal is finally given, when the column halts and the sergeant barks something that vaguely resembles "make camp," you don't think. You don't plan. You drop. Right there, right where you're standing. You roll to one side, vaguely arrange your cloak over your body like a human-shaped burrito, and let go. Some men don't even unbuckle their belts. They lie down fully dressed, mail still on, one boot half off. One guy nearby is actually asleep standing up, head bowed like he's praying. You watch him sway for a full minute before he tips forward and lands face first in the mud. He doesn't wake up. You consider checking on him, but then you blink, and it's been 15 minutes. This is what march fatigue does to you. It steals your awareness in slow pieces, replaces it with blank space. You stop noticing time, stop caring about the weather, stop bothering to shake the rocks out of your boots. Your body gives up protesting and just runs on fumes. You've caught yourself drifting into micro naps while walking, your head bouncing forward like you're nodding along to some sad imaginary song. Historical sources mention this exact phenomenon. Chroniclers describe soldiers collapsing mid-step, slumping beside roads like discarded sacks. Some accounts from the Crusades talk about men who slept with their arms still gripping their spears. Others write of soldiers who walked off cliffs or into enemy camps because they were too exhausted to notice. Fatigue didn't just make you vulnerable, it made you stupid, dangerous stupid. You felt that too. The haze. You once poured wine into your boot instead of your cup. Just stood there watching it splash into the leather like it made sense. Nobody even had questioned it. One guy just shrugged and said, "Well, it'll kill the lice," which, fair point. There's a myth that medieval soldiers were tough as iron, that they could go for days without sleep, fueled by grit and boiled onions or whatever. And sure, some of them could, but most, they passed out the same way you do now, hard, fast, and with the zero grace, like rocks flung at the earth by gravity and bad choices. The fringe fact tonight? Some armies used marching songs not to boost morale, but to literally keep men from falling asleep while walking. Simple chants, repetitive and rhythmic, designed to trick the brain into staying just barely conscious. You've heard a few low, dull, ugly things with verses about beer and mothers and bowel movements. They're not inspiring, they are just noise. But they work. Sleep rotations? In theory, sure. On paper, every squad gets rest in shifts, someone always watching, always alert. In practice, it breaks down fast. You've seen men fake wakefulness, nodding sagely at the fire while absolutely snoring through their eyes. You've been one of them. There are whole conversations you don't remember having because your body was speaking but your brain had already left. You curl tighter under your cloak now, eyes fluttering shut without permission. The fire's long gone. The embers are grey. The guy next to you is using his helmet as a pillow. That's bold. Or stupid, maybe both. But you respect it a bit. There's a rock digging into your shoulder blade, but moving would cost too much energy. You consider negotiating with it. Maybe if you lie still, it'll go away. It doesn't. You accept your fate. In the half-sleep haze, you remember a story someone told during the last march. A guy in the Alps, centuries ago, who slept standing up for 3 days during a siege. Supposedly tied to a post, only waking when his knees buckled. Total nonsense, obviously. But right now it sounds completely plausible. You drift, not into dreams, those require deeper sleep than you're allowed, but into a weird limbo of sensations, cold breath on your cheek, the distant crunch of boots in frost, someone muttering in their sleep, your own heart, heavy and slow in your chest. You could die like this, and you'd be too tired to care. That's the scary part. Not the dying, but the apathy. The comfort in giving in, but you don't, not tonight. Because in an hour or 3 you'll be roused again, back on your feet, back to marching, back to the same nightmare loop, so you let your eyes close, one last time. You don't have time to sleep, but you'll take what your body gives you, even if it's just 15 minutes in the mud. You wake up to a smell so foul it physically pulls you from sleep, like being slapped across the face with a wet rag dipped in spoiled milk and old onions. It hits your nose like a battering ram, then settles into your throat and refuses to leave. You gag. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a quiet, hopeless little dry heave that says, "Yeah, this is normal now. Welcome back to camp." You sit up slowly, peeling your cloak off your face like it's fused there. It's still damp. Everything is. Your tunic sticks to your back, your boots squelch when you shift, and your hair, what little of it isn't plastered to your scalp, is starting to smell like something that's been left in a sack too long. You can't tell if the sky is grey from clouds or just your own blurry vision. It all blends together now, but that smell, it's still there, still wrapping around you like a damp rope. It's not just human waste or rotten rations, though that's part of it. It's camp. The full-bodied stench of too many people living too close together for too long without soap, sanitation, or dignity. You breathe through your mouth, but that just brings the taste. Smoke, sweat, iron, rot. You wonder how long it'll take for your senses to give up entirely. Maybe that's the final form of the camp. Sensory shutdown. Total detachment. You're halfway there already. Around you, the camp is stirring in its usual way, slow, reluctant and angry. Someone's trying to relight a fire using kindling that's obviously too wet. The wood hisses, smokes, and refuses to cooperate. The man curses, throws down a flint, and gives up. Another soldier is scraping mud off his gambeson with a piece of broken pottery, like that'll help. It won't. And then someone farts loudly, confidently, and without apology, cuts through the morning air like a war horn. Nobody reacts, not even the guy sitting right next to him. That's just life now. You shift to your knees and start rubbing the sleep from your eyes, only to discover that your fingers are crusted with something unidentifiable. Dried stew, mud, blood, or maybe all three. You wipe them on your cloak. You stopped caring about hygiene on day 2 of this campaign, when the last bit of soap in camp was traded for a strip of dried pork. Historical fact, most medieval camps stank. That's not artistic license, it's a matter of record. Chroniclers complained of foul air thick with humours, while soldiers wrote of the reek of mankind and stench that clung like sickness. You're living that now. You are that now. It's not just unpleasant, it's oppressive. A physical thing that clings to your skin and makes you question whether you were ever clean to begin with. The worst part? You're getting used to it. You wander toward the edge of the sleeping area, scanning for a spot that doesn't smell like death. There isn't one, so you squat down in the least offensive corner and try not to inhale. A man nearby is scraping out a cooking pot that definitely hasn't been washed in weeks. He's using a twig, not even a sharp one, just a bent stick. You watch the crust flake off in slow, sad pieces. Someone else is brushing their teeth with a bit of chewed ashwood. You respect the effort, but it's a losing battle. Everyone here has breath that could knock over a horse. You once saw a man gag himself with his own halitosis. It was impressive. Horrifying, but impressive. Here's a weird fringe fact for you. Some medieval soldiers believed the smell of the camp kept evil spirits away, that the sheer force of human stench acted as a kind of divine protection. You're not sure about spirits, but it definitely keeps wildlife at bay. No wolves, no bears. Nothing with a nose is coming near this place unless it's starving or suicidal. The debate still rages among scholars over how bad it really was. Some argue that people were more accustomed to strong smells in the Middle Ages and didn't register them as intensely. Others say the descriptions we have are proof that it was truly unbearable, even to people with lower standards of cleanliness. You've decided the answer is simple. If something makes your eyes water now, it made theirs water then too. You move toward one of the latrine trenches out of necessity, not bravery. It's less a trench and more of a suggestion at this point. Just a shallow depression in the earth, surrounded by discarded scraps of fabric, broken bits of clay, and a fly population so aggressive they could be trained as mercenaries. You do what you have to do as fast as humanly possible, and shuffle away without looking back. You pass a man washing his hands with snow, not clean snow either, just the least yellow he could find. You nod at him, he nods back. It's the little gestures that hold society together out here. Back near your bedroll, someone's pouring wine into a cracked cup and handing it around. Morning wine, medicinal of course, or so everyone claims. You take a sip when it reaches you. It's sour, thin, probably cut with river water, but it burns just enough to remind you you're alive. You settle down again, knees tucked in, cloak pulled tight. The smell's still there, will always be there, but you've reached a place beyond complaint. A strange sort of acceptance. You're not clean, you're not warm, and you're not even fully human anymore, if we're being honest. You're just part of the camp. A breathing, sweating, stinking piece of the collective misery. And that, somehow, is comforting. There's something about a campfire at night that makes everyone talk like they've forgotten war as a thing, not during the day, mind you. Then it's all barking orders and spitting curses, shoulders hunched against the cold and minds focused on staying alive. But at night, with the fire down to a soft amber glow, and the air just quiet enough to hear yourself breathe, things change. The stories come out. The real ones, the weird ones. The kind that make you wonder whether you're stuck in a battlefield or sitting around some haunted tavern full of unreliable narrators and questionable memories. It starts with a song. Always does. Nothing complex, just a low droning hum that someone starts because silence is worse. A line about a woman back home, or ale, or how the moon used to mean something before you had to sleep under it every night. You recognise the tune, everyone does. It's been bouncing around the continent for decades, changing a word here or there, becoming something new and old at the same time. After that, it only takes one person to start, tonight. It's a man from the southern coast, Gaetan or Garan, something like that. He's got a voice that sounds like gravel wrapped in bread crust and a face like a boiled boot. He leans in toward the fire and says, "You ever hear about the girl who wandered into camp before a battle?" A few heads turn. No one stops him. No one ever does. You just keep sipping from your chipped cup of warm, diluted wine and let the voice carry you. The fire crackles, the wind sighs, and suddenly you're somewhere else. He tells the story like it's truth. How a girl, barefoot, wild hair, eyes like smoke, appeared in a soldier's tent one night before a siege, said nothing. Just stood there looking straight through him. He called for the guard. They came. She was gone. The next morning, half the men in that unit were dead, arrows in their backs. She was the battle's shadow here. He says, eyes glinting, came to mark the ones who wouldn't see another dawn. No one laughs. That's the trick. Around a medieval campfire, you don't mock stories like that. Not because you believe them necessarily, but because someone does. And because sometimes they're not just stories. Someone else chimes in. A scar-faced veteran with more wrinkles than teeth. He tells of the screaming trees in the Black Forest. How if you hear your own name whispered from the woods at night, you don't answer. You turn away, you press your fingers to your ears, and if the whisper comes a second time, you pray, because the third time, that's not the forest anymore. The younger soldiers lean in, eyes wide. You can tell they're halfway between laughing and listening. That's how it starts for everyone. You want it to be a joke. But deep down, there's that tickle in the base of your spine, the one that says maybe, just maybe, the world's weirder than you thought. And out here, with death as your neighbour, the weird starts to feel almost reasonable. One of the quietest men in the group, someone who rarely speaks at all, finally breaks his silence. He says he once heard crying in the middle of a battlefield at night. Not sobbing, child's crying, high, distant, echoing across the empty camp. Thought it was his imagination until two others mentioned it the next day. No children for miles. Nothing left alive, really. Just the sound. Just once, then never again. You sit there, legs drawn up, cloak pulled tight, feeling the warmth of the fire on your face and the chill of the night at your back. The stories keep coming, passed around like shared rations. Ghosts, witches, a knight who disappeared during a hunt and came back with eyes as black as coal, claiming he'd met a pale woman in a silver dress who taught him how to speak to the dead. He died a month later in his sleep. No wounds, just gone. Stranger still, no one remembers burying him. Historical accounts are full of these kinds of stories, folklore woven through with just enough fact to keep them alive. Medieval soldiers were a superstitious bunch, and for good reason. When you live on the edge of civilization, sleep among corpses, and wake up not knowing if you'll see the next dusk, anything becomes possible. Omens, signs, portents, they weren't luxuries. They were survival mechanisms, ways to make sense of the senseless. And here's your fringe fact for the night. In some medieval mercenary companies, ghost stories were considered part of training. Seriously, commanders would intentionally tell frightening tales to keep green recruits from wandering too far from camp at night. Fear kept you close, close kept you alive. Monsters in the woods, maybe not real, but they kept you from getting lost and ambushed. Practical paranoia. There's still academic debate about how widespread these tales were, whether they were regional or cultural or just the result of too much bad wine and sleepless nights. But the consistency across languages and time periods is eerie. The woman before the battle, the crying voice in the woods, the soldier who dreams of death then dies. Versions of these show up in records from France to Poland to Byzantium. Same themes, same chills. Back around the fire, the stories finally trail off. The wine's nearly gone. The flames are low. One man's dozing against a saddle, snoring softly. Another stares into the coals like he's trying to read them. No one speaks. The silence returns, but it's a different kind now. Not just absence of noise. It's loaded, full of everything that's been said and everything that wasn't. You lie back on your cloak, eyes on the stars, what few you can see through the smoke and mist. For a moment, you almost forget where you are. You're just a body under the sky, surrounded by men with stories in their bones and firelight in their eyes. Then someone mutters, almost to himself, she only visits before the dying, and everyone hears it, but no one says a word. By the time the flask makes it to you, it's half empty and still warm from the last pair of hands. You take a swig anyway. It's awful, somewhere between vinegar and spoiled plum juice, but it burns a little going down, and that's really all you're asking for. Warmth, burn, escape, even if it's fleeting and makes your stomach twist like a bucket of eels. You pass it to the next guy and don't ask what's in it. You already know it's better that way. Alcohol is a regular guest in the medieval battle camp, and not just for the parties you're definitely not having. It's medicine, mood balm, and mobile heater all in one. You drink to sleep, you drink to numb, you drink to forget how cold your fingers are and how bad your boots smell. You drink because everyone else is drinking, and because saying no makes people look at you like you're planning to desert, and maybe you are, but not tonight. The man beside you takes a longer pull from the flask than he should. He coughs. Everyone chuckles. A small dry sound like laughter filtered through old leather. No one's really in a festive mood, but there's something about passing around a bottle that feels like a spell. Like maybe, just for a little while, this isn't a field full of frostbitten misery and unspoken trauma. Maybe it's a tavern, a really, really bad one. But still. You settle back down onto your roll, still damp, still straw-stuffed, still vaguely mouse-scented, and pull your cloak tighter. The alcohol spreads slowly from your chest outward, a creeping warmth that's more psychological than physical. You feel your shoulders drop. Your jaw unclenches. It's not sleep yet, but it's a detour. You'll take it. The guy on your other side has already drifted off. You can tell by the way his breath starts to stagger, almost whistling through the hole where one of his front teeth used to be. He's still clutching the neck of his wineskin like it owes him money. He'll wake up freezing and hungover, but for now he looks like the happiest man in camp. Here's the trick with drinking in cold weather. It feels like it helps, but it doesn't. Not really. It dilates your blood vessels, brings warmth to the skin, and convinces your brain that everything's fine. But inside, your body is losing heat even faster. That doesn't stop anyone. You've seen men pass out shirtless next to a fire, grinning like they were back home in a summer field. You've seen others vomit in their sleep and roll right back over into it. You once saw a man try to cook with wine instead of water. He caught his cloak on fire and didn't notice until someone tackled him. You drank that stew anyway. It wasn't bad. Historically, alcohol was one of the few things armies could count on. Beer, ale, mead, wine, it didn't matter. It didn't even need to taste good. As long as it burned and didn't kill you too quickly, it had value. Some commanders issued rations of wine or beer to the troops daily, not just for morale, but because the water was often worse. Fermented drinks didn't just make you forget how miserable you were, they kept you alive. Ish. Of course, that meant soldiers got really good at smuggling extra in. You've seen flasks hidden in boots, sewn into bedrolls, even baked into loaves of bread. One man hollowed out the handle of his axe to hide a thin bottle of plum brandy. Ingenious. Dangerous. Predictably, he died tripping over his own feet while drunk, but still points for creativity. And here's a particularly disturbing fringe fact. In at least one medieval winter siege, there's record of men boiling down wine to concentrate the alcohol, then mixing it with melted snow and passing it around like medicine. Supposedly it made you sleep hot. More likely it made you unconscious long enough to forget your feet were turning black. Scholars aren't sure how common this practice was, but the fact that it's written down at all says enough. Tonight the wine doesn't knock you out. Not completely. It just pulls your mind sideways, lets it sink into that weird not sleep where you stop thinking in sentences and start thinking in half-formed shapes. You're vaguely aware of the fire's last coals glowing. You hear someone mutter a lullaby in a language you don't understand. You feel your own breath go thick and slow, and then, cold. It returns like a slap. Not gradual, just there. You realise with a sigh that your body has betrayed you. The wine is fading, the heat is gone, and now your limbs are shaking harder than before. Your fingers curl into fists to trap whatever warmth they can. But it's no use. You drank too much, or not enough. Your body's lost the fight for balance, and now you're paying for it. This is the cost. The hangover starts before you're even sober. Your head pulses, your stomach gurgles like a dying frog, and worst of all, your bladder has declared war. You debate holding it. You always do, but eventually the need becomes unbearable, and you crawl out of your semi-warm cocoon to go find the least awful bush. The night is cruel. The air bites your face and your knees crack as you crouch. You're peeing into the wind. Of course you are. You curse the wine, the weather, the fire, your own bladder, and the man who gave you the first sip, who is now snoring in a position that makes it look like he's trying to fold himself in half. You return to your bedding. It feels colder now, damper somehow. You curl up again, tucking your hands between your thighs, pressing your knees to your chest. Oh. Your head aches. Your stomach grumbles, full of nothing but acidic wine and soldier stew, but you close your eyes anyway. There's a brief moment, just a flicker, where you remember a warm bed, a real one, blankets, a mattress, a soft breeze through a window, not an icy blast across your face. And you almost cry, almost, but then the wind shifts, and you smell someone vomiting behind the scents. And just like that, you're back. There's an odd sort of comfort in realizing that your enemy is just as miserable as you are. Not the abstract other side, not some faceless horde from across the river, or the distant mountains. No, those are still terrifying. But when you finally see the opposing camp, catch a glimpse of the people huddled over their own sputtering fires, wrapped in ragged cloaks, shivering, scratching, and trying to cook something vaguely edible over wet wood, you realize something else entirely. They're not monsters. They're just cold. You get your first real look during a rare moment of uneasy truce, a temporary pause in bloodshed because both sides, frankly, are too exhausted to lift a sword. So for one day and one night, everyone stares at each other from a safe distance across the valley, trying to pretend like the guy across the field wasn't aiming to stab you yesterday, or won't be again tomorrow. Their camp isn't far, a few 100 yards down the hill, broken into clumps, just like yours. Small fires dot the landscape, barely visible through the mist that creeps in as the sun drops. Their smoke mingles with yours in the air, thin and blue, like the breath of ghosts circling over both armies. You squint through the trees and see movement. Shadows hunched over, hands reaching toward the fire. Figures curling up on the ground just the same way you did last night. They look like you, worse dressed maybe, or better fed, or younger. But the sameness is unavoidable. Even their tents are patched with similar cloth. You can just make out the shape of a man trying to light a pipe with shaking hands. Another one is holding up a fur, probably trading or arguing. A third is lying flat on his back with his feet in the air, like he's trying to dry his socks by the heat of a single candle. That's a universal problem. Wet socks, even in war. A few soldiers on your side scoff at the sight. One jokes about how the enemy builds their fires like children, and another mutters something about lice so big they need helmets. But their voices lack conviction. Because no matter how you spin it, the truth is simple. Those men are freezing just like you, and tomorrow you might have to kill one of them. You lean against a tree, letting your breath cloud in front of you, and wonder what their beds are like. Are they lying on straw, mud? Did they find pine needles like you did last week? Are they also wrapping their boots in cloth at night to stop the chill from sinking through the soles? You wouldn't be surprised. Historical records show just how similar opposing armies could be during campaigns. Different flags, different languages, but often the same gear, the same strategies, the same suffering. During the 100 Years' War, English and French soldiers sometimes camped within earshot of each other, each listening to the other's songs and taunts echoing through the trees. There are even rare accounts of shared fires during impromptu ceasefires, small groups breaking bread, trading wine, exchanging insults that veered more toward comedy than threat. You see none of that tonight, of course. No one's crossing the field, no one's waving a white flag and inviting the other side to share some boiled oats. But there is a moment, just past midnight, when your fire flares and casts a little more light than usual. And for a second, just one heartbeat of time, you meet the eyes of a man on the opposite hill. He's sitting alone, arms around his knees, staring straight at your side of the valley. No armour, just wool and shadow. His face is thin, mouth drawn in a tight line, but his eyes aren't full of hate, just exhaustion. You don't nod, you don't wave, but you don't look away either, and that's something. Fringe fact of the night? During winter campaigns in the Alps, there are rumours, unconfirmed but persistent, of soldiers from both sides sleeping in the same abandoned barns at night, then returning to their own sides come morning. No violence, no words, just two groups of freezing men agreeing silently that sleep outweighed enmity. And then the war resumed at dawn. Modern scholars argue over how common those moments were. Some say they were rare, romanticised after the fact. Others insist that battlefield humanity existed even in the ugliest wars, especially when weather reduced everyone to their base instincts: hunger, warmth, rest, the things that turn enemies into people, at least temporarily. Back at your own fire, someone stirs the coals and the light shifts. The man on the opposite hill disappears into the dark again. You don't know his name, you never will, but you're almost certain he's lying on the same kind of lumpy ground you are, cursing the same damp cloak, muttering the same half-prayer before sleep. As the fire dies down again, your camp goes quiet. Not peaceful, just quieter. Some men sleep, some toss and turn. One is scratching at his thigh like he's trying to dig something out. Another is softly humming a lullaby, the same one you've heard 3 nights in a row. You wonder if the other side can hear it. You wonder if they have the same song. You roll onto your side, cloak pulled tight, knife at your belt. Your bones ache. Your face is crusted with cold sweat. But you feel strange, like something has shifted. Not big, not dramatic, just a little crack in the wall. You remember that man's eyes, tired, human, and you realise that sleep tonight might come just a little easier. Not because you're safe, but because you're not alone in the cold. Morning doesn't come all at once. It creeps. A slow grey smear across the horizon that doesn't so much light the sky as slightly lessen the darkness. You open your eyes before it arrives, not because you've rested, because someone nearby didn't wake up. You hear it in the silence. Not the usual kind, but the wrong kind. The absence of a voice that should be complaining about the cold. No cough, no stretch, no muttered curse about stiff joints or missing boots. Just a shape on the ground, too still for sleep. You don't even need to sit up, you already know. It's not dramatic. There's no scream, no gasp, no frantic shouting for help. It's just a quiet moment where a man reaches out and shakes another man's shoulder, and nothing happens. Then he shakes again, harder this time, still nothing. Eventually the movement stops, and the first man just sits there, staring at the body beside him. He doesn't say anything, he doesn't cry, he just nods, like he's confirming something he already suspected. This isn't the first time. Death in the night happens more often than anyone talks about. It's not from swords or arrows, not from heroic last stands. It's from the cold, from exhaustion, from old infections and half-healed wounds, from malnutrition and exposure and the way the body just gives up after one too many frozen mornings. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's peaceful, but it's always a little too close. You sit up slowly, joints creaking like old wood. Your knees protest. Your lower back feels like it's been stomped on by an angry goat. You glance over at the body, covered now with a blanket that won't warm anyone ever again. No one's gathered around. No ceremony. Just another man gone. One less voice in the night. Someone marks the death by placing a small stone near his head. That's it. No name, no prayers. You didn't know his name anyway. He was just the one with the limp, or the guy who snored like a dying bear. That's how it goes out here. Names fade, identities get replaced with habits, quirks, smells. When someone dies, it's the silence that makes you realise they mattered. Historically, the number of soldiers who died off the battlefield during medieval campaigns is staggering. Cold, disease, hunger, these were deadlier than the enemy. Chronicles tell of entire companies lost to winter, not war. One account from the Burgundian campaign speaks of 60 men who perished in a single week from exposure alone. The enemy didn't need to lift a finger. Nature did all the work. And it's not just cold that kills, it's what the cold allows to happen. A scratch turns septic. A broken toe becomes infected. A cough blossoms into pneumonia. There's no medicine here, just wine and willpower, and neither goes very far in the dead of night. Someone once told you that dying in your sleep is peaceful, that it's better than bleeding out on a field. But out here, that idea doesn't sit right. Because there's nothing beautiful about a man slowly freezing while surrounded by people too tired to notice. There's nothing gentle about quietly slipping away under a piss-stained blanket while someone 2 feet away mutters in his sleep and scratches his lice bites. Fringe fact of the night. In certain winter campaigns, soldiers tied small bells to their ankles when they went to sleep. Not for security, for survival. The idea was, if you stopped moving in the night, the lack of sound would alert someone to shake you awake, force you to drink something warm, check your fingers for frost. Sometimes it worked. More often, the bells just jingled once or twice as the man shifted, then stopped for good. There's a running debate among historians about how common these nighttime deaths were. Some argue they were rare and only mentioned in extreme conditions. Others believe the chroniclers underreported them, focusing on the grand deaths, battlefield heroics and glorious last stands, but the quiet deaths, the ones with no blood, no story, just a man who never moved again, those were forgotten, even though they were everywhere. Back in camp, the day continues. Breakfast is made, some weak stew with more water than substance. Boots are laced, cloaks are shaken out, orders barked, and the man who died is still there, still covered, still cooling beneath the thin veil of a damp cloth. No one moves him yet. There's no energy for rituals. Maybe they'll bury him later. Maybe he'll get tossed into the trench when the next fire pit is dug. You try not to think about it. You've grown used to the idea that your body isn't really yours anymore. It belongs to the cold, to the camp, to the hunger and the wet and the endless shivering. But seeing someone else's body, still lifeless, reminds you that it can end without warning. No big final breath, no clutching at the chest, just stillness. You reach into your pocket and check your fingers, all 10. They still moved, though your left pinky feels stiff. You wiggle it harder. It stings. That's good. Pain is better than numbness. You breathe into your hands and rub them together, watching the mist from your mouth drift away. You mutter something under your breath. Not a prayer, just words. You don't know if anyone hears, but you do it anyway. You glance again at the blanket. Sir, one more time, then you turn away. There are boots to tighten, fires to feed, marching to prepare for. War waits for no man, not even the ones who don't wake up. There's a dog pressed against your side. You're not entirely sure when it got there, somewhere between dreamless sleep and the first twitch of dawn, but now it's curled up beside you like it's always belonged. Wiry, mangy and warm, mostly warm. Its ribs rise and fall with slow, shallow breaths, and it smells like damp hay and old meat. But you don't move. You wouldn't dare, because it's the first decent heat you've felt in days that didn't come from fire or alcohol. And more importantly, it's not dead. Animal heat. You've heard of it, even joked about it. Until now. Until you found yourself shoulder to fur with a mutt that may or may not have eaten a man once. But warmth is warmth, and you pull your cloak tighter around both of you and close your eyes again, just for a few more minutes. You're not asleep, not really. Just existing in a slightly less awful state of consciousness. You're not the only one. Over by the wagon pile, 2 soldiers are sleeping back to back with a mule between them. The beast's long face droops toward the ground, steam rising from its nostrils. One man has his arms draped across its haunches like a child hugging a tree. A few paces farther, someone's sharing his blanket with a shaggy goat, both of them snoring in unison like an unholy duet. You're beginning to suspect the animals are smarter than the soldiers. At least they know how to find body heat and hoard it like treasure. This isn't rare. Not anymore. When the cold becomes an enemy you can't fight with blades, you make deals wherever you can. Man and beast, huddled together, drawing warmth from each other, like poor men stealing bread. The camp becomes less an army and more a barn. Grunts of pigs, breathy whickers from horses, the occasional bark, all woven in with the human sounds of snoring, teeth chattering, and the occasional sleep-muttered curse. The dog shifts against you, back legs kicking as if chasing something in its sleep. You hold still, trying not to disturb whatever rodent it's murdering in its dreams. You glance down. It's scarred along one side, half an ear missing, a constellation of old burns and bites on its neck. A survivor. You nod to it silently. Respect. Historically, animals in medieval camps weren't just work tools, they were insulation. Dogs especially. Some units even brought them intentionally, not just for guarding, but for the warmth. There's written record of warhounds in northern campaigns being allowed to sleep beside their masters, even in tents to keep the frost at bay. Horses too, though less for cuddling and more for the sheer body heat they radiated. Entire squads would sleep near the horse line, using them as massive, living heaters. Horses didn't seem to mind. Most were too tired to notice. And in more desperate situations, soldiers slept under carts with livestock burrowed into hay beside sheep, or, in one grim tale, inside a gutted cow during a mountain blizzard. Yes, that one again. Boom. You've heard it a few times now, everyone swears it happened. No one wants to verify the details. And frankly, you don't want to ask. The fringe fact tonight? There's a 12th century document that describes a Flemish knight sleeping with a goose under his cloak for 3 weeks during a siege, not eating it, not trading it, just keeping it warm and letting it keep him warm. The goose survived. So did the knight. The document doesn't say what happened to their relationship afterward. You stroke the dog's back once, absent-mindedly. It growls faintly, not a threat, just a reminder that affection is tolerated, not expected. You withdraw your hand, nod again, and shift your weight to ease the ache in your hip. The straw underneath you has flattened completely. Might as well be lying on a frozen stone. You consider adding the dog to your roll permanently, but you know how these things go. Tomorrow, it'll be gone, following some cook with scraps. Or worse, someone once said you could tell how far a campaign had gone by how close the men slept to the animals. Early on, everyone sticks to their own, pride still intact, personal space still a concept. A few weeks in and the lines start to blur. A month in, you're holding a chicken like a pillow and offering to share fleas with your bunkmate. In your own corner of camp, the fire's burned low. You can see the outline of a man using his saddle as a pillow, mouth open wide, snoring like a dying furnace. Beside him, another has burrowed halfway under a pile of horse blankets, probably stolen, definitely lice-infested. No one says a word. Possession is 9/10 of warmth out here. Scholars still debate whether medieval soldiers really got this cosy with animals, or if these accounts are embellished over time, but given how desperate people get when temperatures drop and nights stretch long and merciless, it tracks. People will do anything to survive. Pride is the first thing to freeze and fall off. You feel the dog shift again, this time curling closer. Its nose presses into your side. The cloak rustles as you tug it higher over both of you, forming a little tent of stink and survival. You can hear its heartbeat now, quick and steady. You match your breathing to it, just for something to focus on. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crows. Too early, too cold, no one moves. The fire sputters, someone groans, the dog sighs in its sleep. You don't sleep again, not really, but you lie there with that mutt pressed against you, and for the first time in a long while, you're not shivering. You call that a win. By now, you can build a shelter out of anything. Branches, rags, 2 sticks and a whole lot of wishful thinking. Tonight the rain comes back, not a storm, just that drizzling, half-committed kind that never quite pours but never stops either. It leaks from the sky like a guilty apology, soaking your bedroll, your boots, and the top of your head. Even with your hood pulled down so far, you're basically looking through a tunnel, which is exactly why you're under a lean-to made of brush, rope, and a whole lot of creative cursing. It's not impressive. It leans a little too far to the left and sags ominously when the wind picks up, but it's yours. You spent the better part of the afternoon digging a shallow trench for runoff and jamming forked branches into the mud until one of them stuck well enough to hold the weight of your roof, which, let's be honest, is mostly wet leaves, stolen horse blanket scrub, and something that might have been someone's cloak before it got a little too close to a fire. But when you crawl inside and sit down on your damp straw, it almost feels like safety. Almost. The man next to you, one of the quieter ones, tugs at a rope he's rigged to hold up his own brush shelter. His knots are better than yours. You hate him for about 5 seconds, then decide he's a useful neighbour to have. If yours collapses, maybe you'll just roll under his and pretend you're part of his unit. That's how it works out here. Personal boundaries are flexible, especially in the rain. These little shelters, called bivouacs in the more civilized parts of the world, are the only real architecture in the average medieval field camp. Unless you're rich or important, you don't get a tent. You get time, effort, and the hope that your shelter doesn't blow away at 3 a.m. It's not that the army won't give you a tent, it's that the army has other things to worry about, like feeding you. Or not feeding you, depending on how the foraging went. You've seen a lot of these makeshift huts now, and no two are the same. Some are lean-tos, angled low and tight to the ground like little canvas tombs. Others are proper A-frames made with poles and hide, lashed with rope stolen from the supply carts. One guy made his out of shields, stood them on end and tossed a tarp over them like some kind of military turtle. Genius, or stupid, maybe both. Your own structure creaks in the wind. You place a hand on the inside wall and whisper something encouraging to it, like it's a sick mule. "Hold, you stubborn sack of damp twigs!" It groans but doesn't fall. Historically, temporary shelters like this were essential during campaigns, especially in bad weather. Soldiers were expected to build their own, using whatever the landscape gave them. Fallen branches, brush, woven reeds, even sod bricks if they had the time. Some would dig into the earth, creating windbreaks and sunken pits lined with ferns or straw, then cover the top with cloth. Not pretty, but functionedy. A weird little fringe note for you: during a particularly brutal campaign in Lithuania, A German knight recorded sleeping under an inverted boat for an entire week. He called it divinely appointed shelter. Others called it cheating. Either way, he stayed dry. The guy in the next shelter coughs, spits into the mud and mutters something about his back. You grunt in sympathy. There's a whole language here built from grunts, snorts, sighs and tired glares. You've learned to interpret a dozen variations of ugh, from my foot's on fire to if it rains another hour I will simply perish. Inside your shelter it's not dry, but it's drier than outside, which is a kind of win. Water still drips through in slow cold beads that land precisely on the side of your neck or just inside your collar. You shift, curse, adjust the angle of your shoulder. But overall, this is luxury. You lean back against the forked branch you jammed into the ground and feel it bow slightly under your weight. You've named it Walter. Walter is holding up pretty well. The fire is down to embers now. You banked it carefully before crawling into your brush hut, covering the coals with ash and a slab of old bark. There's a soft glow reflecting off the wet ground, barely enough to see by, but enough to let you know you're not alone. Around the camp, dozens of these little huddles blink like dying stars, each with a tired, half-soaked soul curled beneath them. No one sings tonight, no stories, just the gentle hiss of rain on leaves and the occasional snap of twigs as someone gets up to answer nature's call and immediately regrets it. There's an odd comfort to it all, though. Everyone's suffering together. Every man in his little hidey hole of desperation, trying to carve out 6 hours of semi-dry existence before sunrise and marching boots. You close your eyes, listening to the rhythmic plink, plink, plink of rainwater dripping from the edge of your shelter into the trench you dug earlier. It's working. You're not floating. That's the bar. Modern historians argue over just how resourceful common soldiers were when it came to field shelters. Some records suggest armies provided tarps and poles in supply trains. Others insist that soldiers had to fend for themselves entirely. The truth? Somewhere in the middle. Organised armies might give you something, but not enough. Never enough. And ingenuity made the difference between a miserable night and a slightly less miserable one. You stretch out as much as you can, which isn't much. Your feet stick out the bottom of your lean-to, and your right shoulder is pressed against the dripping side, but your torso is dry, your face is covered, and the dog from last night has wandered back and curled up near your knees. You let out a slow breath, not a sigh, more like a test of whether your lungs still work. Walter groans again. You pat him gently. Just a few more hours, old friend. Outside, the rain keeps falling. But in here, for now, you've got Herthos, shelter. You've heard the phrase sleeping in armour tossed around enough that it almost sounds noble, like something a brave knight would do on the eve of battle, blade at his side, heart full of purpose, lying back in shining steel to dream of victory. But here's the reality. Sleeping in armour is about as comfortable as hugging a pile of angry kitchenware while someone slowly lowers you into a frozen pond. You've tried it. Everyone's tried it. And the verdict is unanimous. It's an act of desperation, not valour. Tonight, you're desperate. The warnings were clear. Scouts came back tense, whispering about movement in the woods, missing livestock, strange tracks. You saw the captain's face when he looked at the maps, pale and tight-lipped. No one's saying it out loud, but everyone knows what it means. An ambush is likely. Maybe not tonight, maybe not even tomorrow, but soon. And so now, instead of curling under your cloak with only a dull knife and the shared warmth of a mutt to protect you, you're half-dressed in war. You start with the padded gambeson, of course. Thick, quilted, already stiff from last week's rain. That part's tolerable. You're used to the weight. Then the chainmail hauberk, heavy, cold, and full of sharp little edges that find the exact wrong place to press into. You grunt as you wrangle it over your head, the rings clinking like a bag of angry coins. The moment it settles on your shoulders, you remember every bruise it ever gave you. It's like sleeping wrapped in steel thorns. You skip the greaves. There's a line and frozen metal on bare shins, is it? But you keep your boots on, your helmet within arm's reach, and your sword unsheathed by your side, just in case. You shift onto your back, chainmail clinking with every motion, and immediately regret everything. The rings press into your ribs, your collarbone, the back of your neck. You try your side. Worse, the mail folds, pinches your armpit, digs into your hip. You try your stomach. Better, until the cold metal sucks the warmth right out of your chest. This is how the night begins. Someone nearby tries to roll over in full armour. The sound he makes is somewhere between a groan and a dying donkey. Someone else mutters, bloody idiot, not out of cruelty, but from experience. You've all made the same mistake. At some point, you've all thought, maybe I can sleep in my gear just this once, just to be safe, and then you've all paid for it. The historical truth? Soldiers didn't sleep in armour unless they had absolutely no choice. Not because they were lazy or undisciplined, but because armour isn't pyjamas. It's torture with buckles. It cuts off circulation. It restricts movement. It chafes. You wake up with bruises in places you didn't even know you had muscles. And more than one poor soul in the Chronicles reportedly suffocated in his helmet because he passed out drunk while still wearing it. And chainmail in particular. That stuff has memory. It twists, folds and locks into the exact worst shape possible the moment you stop moving. You spend half the night adjusting links that have curled under your jaw or wedged themselves behind your knees, like tiny, freezing insects. It's less like wearing protection and more like bedding down in a cold metal bear trap. You shift again. A small blessing. Your gambeson keeps most of the mail from biting too deeply, but the pressure on your spine is real. You can feel the shape of every rock beneath you, amplified by 30 pounds of steel, weighing down your frame like a reluctant ghost. Someone to your left gives up completely and starts pulling their armour off with slow, scraping sighs. You hear buckles unlatching, a helm dropping into the mud with a soft thump, and then the unmistakable sound of relief, a long exhale that says, I'd rather die comfortable than live miserable. Fair enough, you think about it. Just tossing the hauberk off, curling back into your cloak and trusting your reflexes if trouble comes. But then you remember the sound of chainmail at midnight a few weeks ago, how it slithered through the dark like a warning, just before a knife ended someone's watch shift. You tighten your cloak over the armour instead and lie still. Here's a fringe little nugget for you. In some siege campaigns, soldiers did sleep in full armour, but only standing up, propped against walls, locked in formation, spears resting on shoulders. One chronicler described it as an orchard of metal men. Another described it as the most miserable night of my life. You believe both. There is still scholarly argument over how often this happened. Some believe it was ceremonial or exaggerated. Others say it was real, born out of sheer necessity when an attack was expected at any moment. Either way, it speaks volumes about the level of discomfort a soldier was willing to endure for the illusion of safety. You tug your hood lower, trying to trap some warmth against your cheeks. The armour breathes cold, it doesn't hold heat, it radiates it away like you're lying in a snowdrift made of knives. Your breath fogs up inside your cloak, wetting the fabric, and now you're both cold and damp. You tell yourself it's worth it. You lie. A lot these days. The dog from last night noses under the edge of your blanket and huffs once, then curls up near your side like an insult. You are pretty sure it's judging your choices. Eventually, somehow your body stops complaining as loudly. Not because you've gotten comfortable, but because you've reached that point of fatigue where even pain becomes background noise. The pressure in your knees, the numbness in your shoulder, the chill in your spine, they're all part of the equation now. Normal, expected. You close your eyes and let your mind go slack. You don't sleep, not really, but your body plays dead for a while, and you hope the enemy does too. Morning doesn't wake you so much as yank you out of a full-body rust. It starts with your knee, a stiff jolt as you try to stretch and immediately regret it. Your back follows, then your hip, then your neck, each part of your body creaking like you've been sleeping under a collapsed bookshelf. You shift under your blanket, groan softly, and instantly become aware of two things. You are somehow colder than you were when you fell asleep, and your body has fused with the ground. The armour didn't help. You knew it wouldn't. You peel yourself off the frozen mud inch by inch, the gambeson clinging to your undershirt like old bread stuck to the bottom of a pan. Everything hurts. Your shoulders are stiff, your calves feel like wound-up rope, and your right elbow makes a very suspicious popping sound as you flex it. You're not worried. That's just morning music out here. Pop, creak, groan, wheeze, the official symphony of waking up in a medieval battle camp. Your fingers are the worst. You hold them up to your face and watch as they tremble, tinge red around the knuckles and white at the tips. Numb, again, you curl them into fists, try to coax blood back in. It's like waking up with 10 wet sticks taped to your hands. You slap them together for warmth, then shove them under your armpits. Then, in pure desperation, stick them under the sleeping dog still curled at your feet. He grunts but doesn't move. Bless him. Around the camp, other soldiers are waking the same way. You hear groans, some loud and theatrical, others whispered through gritted teeth. One man tries to stand and immediately sits back down, clutching his lower back like he's been shot. Another is trying to walk without bending his knees. You know that walk. It's the "my hips locked up again" shuffle. No one has slept well, but they slept enough, or at least long enough to make it to this fresh little circle of misery we call morning. One of the younger boys is rotating his shoulder in slow circles and muttering something under his breath. His helmet fell off during the night and is now half filled with water. He dumps it out and stares at it like he's wondering if it's still legally a helmet or if it's turned into a very stupid soup bowl. Your own gear is in no better shape. Your cloak is damp, your boots are wet inside and out, and your chainmail has left a ring pattern stamped into your skin that will probably never go away. You look like someone tried to brand you using kitchen utensils. You try to stand and everything goes sideways for a moment. Your knees don't bend the way they're supposed to. Your lower back seizes. You make a noise, a low, helpless sort of groan, and the guy next to you just nods in sympathy. No words, just pain solidarity. Here's the thing no one tells you. After a certain point, the cold stops feeling like cold. It becomes something else, something heavier. It wraps around your joints like wet rope and sinks into your muscles until even blinking feels like an effort. And once you do move, that's when the real torment begins. Blood comes rushing back in like a battalion of tiny horned demons. Your fingers sting. Your toes twitch. You hiss between your teeth and ride it out. Historically, this wasn't just discomfort. It was dangerous. Medieval soldiers had to deal with cold-induced injuries constantly, especially when the campaigns dragged into winter or climbed into mountainous terrain. Frostbite was real, even if they didn't have a name for it. They just called it the Black, and it was treated with a mix of herbal salves, prayer, and more often than not, amputation. Because if the tips of your fingers or toes went numb long enough, they stopped being yours. In more organised armies, officers sometimes conducted morning inspections specifically to check for frost damage, making men line up and show their hands, bare their feet. Anyone found with blue or blackened extremities would be pulled out of rotation, if they were lucky. If not, they'd be left to ride it out with a bottle of wine and a bucket of boiling water. Neither worked particularly well, and the fringe fact tonight: there's a 14th century account of an army that issued sheep fat rubs before sleep, not for healing, but as a preventative measure. The soldiers were instructed to coat their feet, hands, even their faces with lard before bedding down, believing the fat would insulate them against the cold. The result? Half the army got frostbite anyway, and the other half got mauled by dogs in the night. No one's sure if the story's fully true, but the image is hard to shake. You try to walk again. This time your legs cooperate, but they feel like they're held together with old rope and spite. Your knees click, your spine cracks. You mutter your favourite phrase, still breathing, and shuffle toward the nearest fire pit where someone's trying to coax flames from yesterday's coals using damp straw and a prayer. You squat beside the fire and hold your hands over the smoke. It stinks of wet wood and burnt horse dung. But it's warm, and right now that's worth more than a silver ring or a clean pair of socks. You sit in silence with the others, all of you leaning in like freezing birds. The quiet is oddly comforting. No one's in the mood to talk, words require energy, and none of you have much to spare. You glance down at your hands again. They're pinker now, shaking less. The stinging has settled into a dull ache, and your fingers are moving with something close to coordination. You flex them one by one, and let out a breath you didn't realise you were holding. You survive the night. You'll probably regret it later, when the marching starts and your armour starts eating your shoulders again. But for now, in this fragile dawn, surrounded by stiff joints and half-dead boots, you can count that as a win. You don't get to sleep the whole night. That's the biggest myth about camp life. People think you just lie down in your straw and rags and drift off until the rooster crows and someone tosses you a chunk of bread. But sleep here doesn't come in long, peaceful stretches. It comes in broken, jittery pieces, like dropped coins scattered across a stone floor. If you get 2 uninterrupted hours, you guard those hours like they're made of gold. Everything else, you snatch in slivers, 10 minutes here, half an hour there, if you're lucky, because someone always has to be awake. Tonight, that someone is you. You've pulled first watch and you're not thrilled about it. You sit hunched near the edge of camp, a worn wool blanket over your shoulders, trying to look awake while your body quietly falls apart. The sword across your lap is cold to the touch, and your eyes sting with fatigue. You lean forward, elbows on your knees, and stare out into the dark like it might blink back. It doesn't. It never does. Behind you the camp snores, rustles, sighs, a symphony of half-conscious misery. Some men have curled into tight balls, faces buried under cloaks, trying to hold their warmth in. Others lie spread out like broken dolls, too exhausted to even shield themselves. The fires have burned down to faint orange hearts, barely more than shadows now. You keep one eye on them, half hoping for a reason to poke at something with a stick and look busy. The night air isn't as cruel as it has been, just biting, not lethal. Your breath fogs in front of you in small regular puffs. And you keep your hands tucked under your armpits to preserve what little feeling remains in your fingers. Every few minutes you stand and pace in small stiff circles to keep the blood moving. Your knees hate you, your ankles scream, you ignore them both. Tactical sleep, they call it. You've heard commanders mention it like it's a science. Staggered rest rotation, they say, as if breaking up 8 hours of sleep into 4 uneven shifts across 3 days is somehow good for morale. In theory, everyone gets a chance to rest while someone keeps watch. In reality, no one sleeps deeply, and the ones on duty drift off standing up, heads bobbing like broken puppets. It's not unheard of to sleep while standing. You've done it once, didn't even know until you felt your knees buckle, and jolted awake just in time to catch yourself. Others aren't so lucky. A man in the next company fell forward during his watch last week, cracked his chin on a rock and bit through his tongue. Now he drinks soup and drools on his boots. They still make him stand watch. Fair is fair. You shift your weight and scan the darkness again. Everything looks the same. Black trees, grey mist, the occasional flutter of leaves that makes your heart stutter before you realise it's just wind. You listen hard, the kind of listening where your ears buzz from effort. Still nothing. Sleep is the real enemy. Not bandits, not wolves, not even the enemy army. Sleep is the creeping thing that waits behind your eyes, slowly clawing its way forward until you blink, and suddenly it's dawn and you don't remember the last 4 hours. That's when bad things happen. That's when men die in their bedrolls with knives in their backs. So you force your eyes open, stretch your arms, rub your face and tell yourself just a little longer. A little longer. Then you can rest. Historically, night watches were taken very seriously. In some armies, falling asleep on watch was a hanging offence. Others preferred flogging. In certain mercenary companies, the penalty was simpler. The man who fell asleep was left behind. That kind of motivation tends to keep your eyelids twitching. But the fringe twist? There's at least one documented account of watchmen sleeping in pairs back to back, each responsible for keeping the other awake. If one started to nod off, the other would elbow him, or, in more extreme cases, bite his ear. Not affectionately, just enough to remind him he was supposed to be the eyes of the camp, not another body waiting for burial. You glance up at the moon, barely oblivious tonight, tucked behind gauzy clouds. You feel time dragging, slow and sticky. Your body sways slightly where you sit. You roll your shoulders, then stand again. Movement helps, just a few more minutes. Then blessed relief. The soft crunch of footsteps behind you. You don't reach for your sword. You already know the pattern. It's your relief, arriving like a saint. You don't even speak. You just grunt, pass him the blanket, and shuffle back toward the camp with the gait of a man whose joints have made other plans. You find your bedroll, still warm from your absence, curl back under your cloak and exhale. But sleep doesn't come right away. Your body's buzzing with fatigue, but your mind bud is still standing watch, still scanning the dark, still listening for sounds that don't belong. It takes time, long, fidgeting minutes before your breathing slows, your jaw unclenches, and your muscles finally surrender. You don't dream, you never do anymore, but you rest, at least until it's your turn again. You wake to smoke and silence, the good kind of silence, not the tense, sharp-edged kind that signals something's gone horribly wrong, but the kind that fills a camp in the calm before motion. No shouting yet, no orders barked. Just the hush of breath and fire, and that heavy, fragile pause that holds the morning in its palm before the day decides what it's going to be. You open one eye. The fire near your feet is down to its last few embers, the wood scorched and split open like bones left too long in the sun. Thin trails of smoke drift lazily into the air, curling through beams of cold early light. It's not bright, just less dark. The mist is low and wet, hugging the earth in thin swathes that make everything look dreamlike and far away. Around you the camp is slowly rising. Quiet movements. Men sit up, rub their faces, tug at cloaks, someone coughs. Someone else curses as he tries to put on a boot that froze solid overnight. You hear the soft clink of chainmail being lifted, the creak of old leather, and the dull, rhythmic thud of someone chopping kindling with a knife that's seen better days. The air is cold but not biting, just enough to make your hands ache when you move them, your breath visible in short puffs that disappear before they rise too high. You curl forward and stretch your back, which rewards you with a delightful series of pops and cracks that sound like someone stepping on branches. Your fingers are sore, but they move. Your toes respond when you wiggle them inside your boots. That's 2 victories before you've even stood up. Someone nearby stirs a pot over a low flame, the smell of something vaguely edible drifting your way. It's thin gruel, probably barley or lentils or whatever the foragers scrounged up yesterday, but to your stomach it smells like roasted goose. You ease over to the fire, rubbing your arms and the shoulders as you go, and squat beside it, palms extended toward the heat. The man tending the pot gives you a nod without speaking. His eyes are puffy with sleep and his beard is stiff with frost. You nod back, no words necessary. You take the bowl he offers you, tin, dented, still warm from the last guy, and sip the contents slowly. It's hot, watery, and tastes like wood shavings and salt. You almost cry from happiness. Across the camp, others eat. Some talk quietly, most just sit. There's a kind of reverence to it. This moment before orders start flying and boots start stomping. No one wants to break it, not even the loud ones. It's like the whole camp knows instinctively that this is the last breath before the plunge. You take it in, the smoke, the soft clang of pots, the creak of wet saddles being inspected, the smell of horses, mud and fire-melted ice. You turn your eyes toward the tree line. Beyond it lies today, the next march, the next fight, maybe the next town, maybe nothing at all. But right now, it's just trees in the distance, half shrouded by fig. You pretend they're not hiding a dozen reasons to die. There's something strange in this pause, this ritual of mourning, something almost sacred. It's not joy, not exactly, but it's a kind of peace, born not from comfort but from consistency. You know what comes next. Pack your things, lace your boots, hoist your gear, wait for the order, move, march, repeat. There's a rhythm to it, a grim music, and in that music, there's a kind of survival. You look down at your hands, dirty, cracked. One knuckle is split and weeping a little. You wipe it on your tunic. The leather of your gloves is stiff with dried sweat, but you pull them on anyway. Cold fingers are a liability. You've learned that the hard way. Historically, morning in a medieval battle camp was a critical window. The first few hours of daylight were spent assessing injuries, checking weapons, gathering firewood and, if luck held, eating. Officers walked the lines, scanning for signs of fatigue or desertion. Camp followers refilled water barrels, squads reassembled, all of it done quickly, often silently, because the enemy could be just beyond the trees, just beyond the hill, or worse, already watching. And here's your final fringe fact of the night. In some companies, soldiers believed the smoke from the morning fires carried messages to the dead, that the scent of ash and broth and sweat rising into the sky would reach fallen comrades and tell them the company still marched. Some men would even whisper names into the fire just before the embers died out. Names of friends, brothers, fathers. You don't know if that's true. But it's the kind of thing you'd believe when you've been sleeping in mud and fear for 30 nights straight. You finish your food, stand slowly. Every joint protests. Your body is a map of bruises, aches and cold patches. But you're upright, you're still here. The captain begins calling names. Men answer, one by one, voices gruff and scratchy. The list gets shorter every day. No one talks about that. You grab your gear, sling your pack, tighten your belt, the fire flickers behind you, the smoke fades into the air. You take one last look at the small patch of earth where you slept and wonder if it'll remember you. Then you turn and join the line. The sun is a pale smear in the sky, too weak to warm anything, but bright enough to make you squint. Boots crunch on frost-hardened grass. Someone coughs again, someone else mutters a prayer. And just like that, the camp moves. Another night survived, another march ahead, and maybe, just maybe, a real bed waiting somewhere. Someday. So you made it. Somehow. Through 30 nights of mud, fire, frost, and human snoring so violent it should qualify as siege warfare. You've slept in damp straw, under brush huts, wrapped in furs that probably belonged to someone else, and possibly something else. Layered in wool, half frozen in chainmail, curled beside a farting mule, and wide-eyed through night watch with a blade on your lap and your bladder full. And every single time you woke up stiff, sore, and vaguely surprised to still have all your fingers. Because that's what sleep was in a medieval battle camp. Not rest, not comfort, survival. A negotiation between body and cold, between exhaustion and danger. You didn't get peace. You got pause, just long enough to keep going. To lift your sword the next day. To march another 12 miles in wet boots and sour cheese breath, dreaming of dry feet and not dying. Along the way you learned things. How a gambeson becomes a mattress. Why you never sleep in full armour unless you're feeling particularly masochistic. That dogs, goats and horses make better heaters than half the soldiers in your unit. You learned that a campfire isn't just warmth, it's community, defence, and sometimes your only friend when the dark starts whispering weird things. And you learned the quiet horror of waking up and realising someone didn't. That's war. Medieval style. Raw, cold, and stitched together with faith, mud, and a little bit of dumb luck. Now, as you step away from that long, aching stretch of sleepless nights, maybe take a moment to appreciate your bed, your real bed, the one with a mattress and sheets and a pillow that doesn't smell like wet leather and disappointment. Pull those covers a little tighter tonight. Feel that warmth soak into your limbs. And if you wake up tomorrow with all your toes still attached, you're already winning. Thanks for sticking with me through this long, chilly journey. If you enjoyed it, hey, maybe like the video and subscribe, or don't. I'm not your commander. But if you do come back, bring a blanket. The next story might be even colder.